Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. The diesel engine of Zachariah's 18-wheeler rumbled to a stop in the industrial district of New Orleans East, where the abandoned warehouses stretched like broken teeth against the purple-black sky of 3 in the morning. 27 years behind the wheel had taught him plenty about reading situations, about sensing when something wasn't quite right. But exhaustion had a way of dulling even the sharpest instincts. He'd been driving for 14 straight hours, pushing through from Houston with a trailer full of high-end electronics bound for a distribution center that wouldn't open until 7. The smart play would have been to find a proper truck stop, somewhere with lights and security cameras and other drivers around, but every decent spot along I-10 had been packed solid. This particular stretch of Chef Mentor Highway had caught his eye on the GPS as he searched for somewhere to catch his mandatory rest break. The area looked industrial enough on the map, the kind of place where a parked semi wouldn't draw attention, where he could sleep for a few hours without some security guard knocking on his door telling him to move along. What the map didn't show was how the economic collapse had hollowed out this part of the city, leaving behind a graveyard of empty buildings and broken streetlights. Zachariah killed the engine and sat in the sudden silence, his ears still ringing from hours of road noise. Through his windshield, he could see the skeletal remains of what used to be a seafood processing plant, its loading dock doors hanging open like mouths frozen mid-scream. To his left, a chain-link fence topped with razor wire protected nothing but weeds and rusted equipment. To his right, more emptiness stretched into darkness. The only working streetlight was 100 yards behind him, casting long shadows that made everything look wrong. He reached for his logbook, marking his location and start time for the break. Company policy required drivers to check in when stopping in unfamiliar areas, but his phone showed only 1 bar of signal. The message to dispatch sent, or at least showed as sending, the little circle spinning endlessly. Zachariah set the phone aside and rubbed his eyes. 4 hours until he needed to be at the distribution center. 3.5 hours of sleep if he was lucky. The cab of his Freightliner had been his second home for so long that he had his routine down to a science. He climbed into the sleeper berth, kicked off his boots, and stretched out on the narrow mattress. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling a loose piece of metal siding on the nearest building. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the sound carrying strange in the humid night air. Zachariah pulled the curtain closed between the cab and the sleeper, blocking out the view of the desolate landscape, and closed his eyes. Sleep came faster than usual, the exhaustion pulling him under like quicksand. In his dreams, he was back home in Shreveport, sitting on his porch with a cold beer, watching his grandkids play in the sprinkler. His daughter was saying something about the 4th of July barbecue, about whether he'd be able to make it this year, and he was promising her he would, absolutely, wouldn't miss it for the world. The sound that woke him wasn't loud, but it was wrong. A metallic tap, deliberate and rhythmic, like someone gently knocking on the trailer. Zachariah's eyes snapped open in the darkness of the sleeper berth. His watch showed 4:17 a.m. He'd been asleep for barely an hour. The tapping came again, 3 measured beats against the aluminum siding of his trailer. Not random, not wind, purposeful. He pushed aside the curtain and peered out into the cab. Through the driver's side window, he could see a figure standing beside his trailer, barely visible in the darkness. As his eyes adjusted, he could make out more details. A man, tall and thin, wearing what looked like work clothes. The man raised his hand and tapped again, the sound carrying clear through the night air. Zachariah's first thought was that maybe someone needed help. Maybe a car had broken down. Maybe someone was lost. But something about the man's posture, the way he stood so still between taps, raised every alarm in Zachariah's head. In 27 years of driving, he'd helped plenty of folks with flat tires and dead batteries, but those people called out, made themselves known, didn't just stand in the dark tapping on your trailer. He reached for his phone, but the screen stayed black. Dead battery. He'd forgotten to plug it in before falling asleep, and now the thing was completely drained. The CB radio was his next option, but as he reached for the handset, movement in his passenger side mirror caught his attention. Another figure, this one shorter and stockier, was approaching from the other side. That's when Zachariah knew this wasn't about someone needing help. The second man had something in his hand, held low against his leg. In the dim light, Zachariah couldn't tell if it was a tire iron, a crowbar, or something worse. The man moved with purpose, not rushing, but not hesitating either, like someone who had done this before. Meanwhile, the tapping on the driver's side had stopped, and when Zachariah looked back, the tall man had moved closer to the cab. Zachariah's hand found the key in the ignition, but starting the engine would take time. The Freightliner needed a moment for the air pressure to build, for the systems to come online. In that time, these men could smash his windows, could get inside, could do whatever they'd come here to do. His mind raced through options, none of them good. The CB microphone was in his hand now, and he pressed the transmit button. "Breaker, breaker, this is Unit 47 Heavy. I need immediate assistance at my 20, Industrial District, New Orleans East. 2 individuals attempting to breach my vehicle. Anyone copy?" Static came back. Either no one was listening at this hour, or no one was close enough to hear. He tried again, his voice steadier than he felt. "Emergency traffic. This is Unit 47 Heavy declaring an emergency. Chef Mentor Highway Industrial District. 2 suspects attempting forced entry. Any unit please respond." The tall man on the driver's side had produced something from his pocket. The distinctive click of a glass cutter against the window made Zachariah's blood run cold. These weren't opportunists. They'd come prepared. The shorter man on the passenger side was doing something to the door handle, working at it with whatever tool he'd brought. Zachariah made his decision. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life. The air pressure gauge showed barely half of what he needed to move safely, but safe had gone out the window the moment that glass cutter touched his door. He slammed the truck into gear, and the big rig lurched forward with a pneumatic hiss of protest. The tall man jumped back, cursing loudly. Through the passenger mirror, Zachariah saw the shorter one stumble and fall as the truck moved. But as he tried to build speed, a third figure appeared in his headlights. This one stood directly in his path, arms spread wide like some insane game of chicken. Zachariah laid on the horn, the sound splitting the night, but the figure didn't move. That's when he saw the others. They emerged from the shadows of the abandoned buildings, from behind rusted dumpsters, from gaps in the fence. 5, 6, maybe 7 more people, all moving toward his truck with the same purposeful stride. This wasn't a random robbery. This was organized, planned, coordinated. The person in front of him finally dove aside as Zachariah pushed forward, the truck building speed despite the low air pressure warning screaming on his dash. In his mirrors, he could see them running after him, some on foot, and now he could hear engines starting. They had vehicles waiting. The industrial road was narrow, lined with potholes and debris. Zachariah had to focus on not jackknifing the trailer as he navigated the obstacles. Behind him, headlights appeared, gaining fast. Whatever they were driving was a lot more agile than his 18-wheeler. He needed to reach the main highway, needed to find lights and witnesses and safety, but the access road stretched ahead into darkness. A van, Jan, pulled alongside him on the left, and through its passenger window, Zachariah could see someone leaning out, gesturing for him to stop. The person was shouting something, but Zachariah couldn't hear over the engine noise and his own pounding heartbeat. He jerked the wheel right, forcing the van to fall back or risk being crushed against a parked cargo container. Another vehicle appeared on his right, trying to box him in. This one was a pickup truck, lifted and modified, the kind of vehicle that could ram his trailer wheels and potentially cause a jackknife. Zachariah was running out of road and options. The main highway was still a quarter-mile ahead, but at this speed, with these vehicles harassing him, it might as well have been on the moon. That's when he remembered the loading dock at the seafood plant. The concrete platform was raised about 4 feet off the ground, with a ramp leading up to it. If he could make it up there, he could buy himself some time, maybe find another way out. It was a desperate move, but desperation was all he had left. He yanked the wheel hard left, the trailer swinging wide behind him. The van, caught off guard, slammed on its brakes to avoid being hit. The pickup tried to follow but had to navigate around a stack of rusted shipping containers. Zachariah aimed for the ramp, praying the old concrete would hold the weight of his rig. The truck climbed the ramp with a grinding protest from the suspension. The loading dock was narrower than he'd hoped, littered with broken pallets and debris, but it was elevated, and that gave him an advantage. The vehicles below couldn't easily follow. They circled like sharks, engines revving, occupants shouting. Zachariah grabbed the CB again, trying different channels, calling for help. On Channel 19, finally, a voice crackled through. 47 Heavy, this is Midnight Rider. I copy your 20, ETA 5 minutes with backup. Hold tight, brother. 5 minutes. In a situation like this, 5 minutes was a lifetime. The people below had gotten out of their vehicles now, and Zachariah could see them more clearly in the headlights. Men and women, various ages, but all with the same predatory focus. One of them had a ladder, was setting it against the loading dock. That's when Zachariah noticed her, standing apart from the others. A woman with distinctive red hair, dressed differently from the rest, cleaner, more put together. She wasn't participating in the action, but seemed to be directing it, pointing and giving orders. When she looked up at his cab, their eyes met through the windshield, and she smiled. Not a friendly smile, but the smile of someone who was enjoying this, who had done this before and would do it again. She raised a hand and made a cutting motion across her throat, the universal sign that sent ice through Zachariah's veins. Then she turned and walked calmly back to a black sedan parked at the edge of the lot, as if she had all the time in the world. The first person had reached the top of the ladder now, a young man with wild eyes and a crowbar in his hand. Zachariah revved the engine, letting the sound fill the night, hoping it would make them think twice. But they kept coming, more ladders appearing, more people climbing. He made another desperate decision. Throwing the truck in reverse, he backed toward the far end of the loading dock where another ramp led down to the opposite side of the building. The trailer swung dangerously inches from the edge, but he managed to keep control. The people on the ladders scrambled to avoid being hit by the moving vehicle. As he reached the other ramp, headlights flooded the lot. Not just one set, but 3, 4, 5. Big rigs, 18-wheelers like his own, forming a convoy. They rolled in with horns blaring, light bars blazing, CB radios crackling with chatter. The cavalry had arrived. The attackers scattered like roaches when the light hits. They abandoned their ladders, ran for their vehicles, peeling out in different directions. The woman in the black sedan was already gone, disappeared into the maze of industrial streets. Within 90 seconds, the lot was empty except for Zachariah and the other truckers. Midnight Rider's voice came over the CB. 47 Heavy. You all right up there, brother? Zachariah's hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the microphone. Copy that, Midnight Rider. I'm good. I'm alive. Follow us out, man. We'll escort you to the Flying J off Bullard. Ain't nobody gonna mess with you while we're around. As Zachariah carefully descended the ramp and fell in behind the other trucks, he caught a glimpse of something spray-painted on the wall of the abandoned plant, visible now in the collective headlights of the convoy. Magnolia's crew owns this road. Magnolia, the red-haired woman. She had a name now, and apparently a reputation. The convoy moved through the empty streets like an armored column, 5 trucks protecting one of their own. Zachariah's hands still trembled on the steering wheel, his mind replaying those terrifying minutes. 27 years on the road, and he'd never experienced anything like this. He'd heard stories, sure, rumors about organized crews that targeted trucks carrying valuable cargo, but he'd always thought they were trucker tales, stories that grew with each telling. But this had been real, coordinated, professional. They'd known exactly what his truck was carrying, had chosen their ambush spot carefully, had come prepared with tools and vehicles and enough people to overwhelm a lone driver. If he hadn't woken up when he did, if that first man had been a little quieter with his tapping, if the CB hadn't finally found a listening ear, Zachariah knew he'd probably be dead right now, his trailer empty, his body dumped in one of those abandoned buildings. As they reached the highway, the lights of civilization finally surrounding them, Midnight Rider's voice came through again. 47 Heavy, you might want to file a report when we get to the truck stop. Cops need to know about Magnolia's crew working that area. Copy that, Zachariah replied, though he wondered what good it would do. The industrial district was a wasteland, the perfect hunting ground for predators like Magnolia and her crew. How many other drivers had fallen into that trap? How many hadn't been lucky enough to escape? The Flying J truck stop appeared ahead like an oasis, bright lights and security cameras and dozens of other trucks, safety in numbers. As they pulled in, the other drivers in the convoy flashed their lights in solidarity before peeling off to find their own parking spots. Zachariah found a spot right under a light pole, right in view of the main building. He wasn't taking any chances. Inside the Flying J, Zachariah's hand still trembled as he poured himself a cup of black coffee from the self-service station. The fluorescent lights felt too bright after the darkness of the industrial district, and every person who walked past made him tense up, wondering if they might be connected to Magnolia's crew. He found a corner booth where he could watch both entrances and sat down heavily, the exhaustion hitting him all at once now that the adrenaline was fading. The coffee was terrible, burnt and bitter, but it was hot and real, and reminded him he was still alive. He pulled out his phone, now charging from a portable battery he kept in his jacket, and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for his dispatcher, Rodriguez. It was barely 5 in the morning, but this couldn't wait. The phone rang 4 times before a groggy voice answered. "Zachariah? What's wrong? You're not supposed to deliver until 7. "Rodriguez, we've got a serious problem. I was just hit by an organized crew in New Orleans East. They tried to hijack the load." There was silence on the other end, then the sound of Rodriguez sitting up in bed, suddenly very awake. "Are you hurt? Is the cargo secure?" "I'm fine. Cargo's intact. Some other drivers helped me get out." "But Rodriguez, this wasn't random. They knew exactly where I'd be, what I was carrying. They came prepared with tools, vehicles, everything. The whole thing was coordinated." "Jesus Christ. You file a police report yet?" "About to. But I'm thinking we might have a leak somewhere. How else would they know about this shipment? It's not like we advertise what we're hauling." Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, and Zachariah could hear him typing on a keyboard. Only 6 people knew about this particular load. Me, you, the shipper, the receiver, and 2 people in our logistics department. I'll start making calls, see if anyone else has had similar problems in that area. The crew leader, a woman with red hair, goes by Magnolia. That name mean anything to you? No, but I'll ask around. Listen, forget the 7 o'clock delivery. I'm calling the client now to reschedule. You get that police report filed, then find somewhere safe to rest. We'll send another driver to take the load the rest of the way. I can finish the run, Rodriguez. I'm already here. No chance. Company policy after an attempted hijacking. You know that. Besides, you sound shaken up. Get some rest, file your reports, and we'll get you deadheading back home tomorrow. Full pay for the entire planned route, don't worry about that. After hanging up, Zachariah sat in the booth for another 10 minutes, trying to process what had happened. Through the window, he could see his truck parked under the lights, looking no different than it had 12 hours ago when he'd started this run. But everything felt different now. The road, which had been his home and his livelihood for nearly 3 decades, suddenly felt hostile, full of shadows and threats he'd never properly considered before. A hand on his shoulder made him jump, coffee sloshing onto the table. But it was just another trucker, an older black man with kind eyes and a gray beard. It was Midnight Rider, the one who'd answered his call. "Easy there, brother," the man said, sliding into the opposite side of the booth. "Just wanted to check on you. You looked pretty rattled when we found you." "I owe you my life," Zachariah said, meaning every word. "If you hadn't shown up when you did, we look out for each other out here. That's how it's always been." Midnight Rider signaled the waitress for coffee. But that scene back there, that was something else. "I've been driving these roads for 35 years, and I've never seen anything that organized." "You said the leader was called Magnolia?" Red-haired woman, probably mid-30s, stayed back and directed the others like it was a military operation. Midnight Rider's expression darkened. "I've heard that name. Last few months there've been whispers about cargo going missing in the Gulf Coast region. Always electronics, pharmaceuticals, high-value stuff. Drivers found dead or beaten so bad they couldn't remember what happened. Word was there was a woman running the crew, but I thought it was just road gossip. It's not gossip. She's real, and she's got a serious operation going. You planning to talk to the cops?" "Soon as I finish this coffee." Midnight Rider leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Be careful with that. NOPD isn't exactly known for giving a damn about what happens in the industrial district. And if Magnolia's crew is as organized as what we saw, they might have connections. You understand what I'm saying?" Zachariah understood perfectly. Corruption in New Orleans was as much a part of the city as jazz and humidity. If Magnolia was running a successful hijacking ring, she was probably paying someone to look the other way. "What do you suggest I do?" "File the report, get it on record, but don't expect much. Then get out of town and don't come back through here alone. These people, they don't forget faces, and they definitely don't forget people who get away." 2 hours later, Zachariah sat in a plastic chair at the New Orleans Police Department's 3rd District Station, filling out his 5th form of the morning. The detective assigned to his case, a tired-looking woman named Brennan, had listened to his story with professional detachment, occasionally asking clarifying questions but showing no real surprise at what he was describing. "This industrial district location," she said, looking at a map on her computer screen. "That's a known trouble spot. We've had several incidents there over the past year. Unfortunately, without license plates, clear descriptions of the perpetrators, or physical evidence, there's not much we can investigate. I told you, the leader's name is Magnolia. Red hair, probably 5'6", drove a black sedan. That's got to be something to go on." Detective Brennan made a note, but her expression suggested she wasn't optimistic. "We'll add it to our database, cross-reference with other incidents. If patterns emerge, we might be able to build a case. But I have to be honest with you, Mr. Crenshaw. These cargo theft rings are sophisticated. They know how to avoid leaving evidence." "So that's it? They just get away with it?" "I didn't say that. We'll investigate, but these things take time. In the meantime, I'd strongly advise your company to avoid that area for deliveries. Maybe use team drivers, avoid stopping in isolated areas, basic security measures. Zachariah wanted to argue, to demand they do more, but he could see it was pointless. To the detective, this was just another case file in a city drowning in crime. He signed the last form, took his copy of the report, and left the station feeling more frustrated than when he'd arrived. Back at the truck stop, he found a message on his phone from an unknown number. The text was simple. "You got lucky tonight. Next time, don't count on help arriving." No signature, but Zachariah knew who it was from. Somehow, Magnolia had gotten his number. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He showed the message to the truck stop security guard, a former Marine named Jackson, who took one look at it and immediately escorted Zachariah to his truck to retrieve his belongings. "You're not staying in that truck tonight," Jackson said firmly. "We've got a driver's lounge in the back, secure area with cameras and keycard access. You can rest there until your company sends someone to get you." The driver's lounge was a simple room with several recliners, a TV playing a weather channel on mute, and 2 other truckers sleeping off their shifts. Zachariah settled into a chair but couldn't close his eyes. Every time he did, he saw Magnolia's smile, that cold expression of someone who enjoyed the fear she created. Around noon, his phone rang. Rodriguez again, and he sounded worried. "Zachariah, we've got a problem. I've been making calls like I said, and I found something disturbing. Remember Bartholomew Ashford from our logistics department, the one who processed your shipment? Tall guy, thin, always wearing those expensive suits. That's him. Well, he didn't show up for work this morning. His keycard was used to access the system at 2 a.m. last night, right around the time you were being attacked. Security footage shows him downloading shipment data and then leaving the building with a box of files." Zachariah sat up straight. "He's working with them. He fed them the information. Looks that way. We've contacted the FBI since this involves interstate commerce, but Bartholomew's in the wind. Cleaned out his apartment, closed his bank accounts. He knew exactly what he was doing." "This wasn't just about my shipment, was it?" "No. Based on what he accessed, he has information on dozens of high-value shipments over the next month. Routes, times, cargo manifests, driver information. Everything Magnolia's crew would need to pick and choose their targets. The implications were staggering. Every driver carrying valuable cargo through the Gulf Coast region was now at risk." Zachariah thought about all the friends he had on the road. Good people just trying to make a living, who might now be driving into ambushes. "We need to warn everyone," Zachariah said. "We're already sending alerts through the company network, and we're sharing information with other carriers. But Zachariah, there's something else. Your name was highlighted in the files Bartholomew took. There were notes about you specifically, about your regular routes, your habits, even personal information about your family." "My family? I'm sorry to tell you this, but it looks like you were specifically targeted. This wasn't just a random selection. For some reason, Bartholomew or Magnolia wanted you in particular." Zachariah's mind raced, trying to think of why he might be singled out. He didn't have enemies, hadn't crossed anyone that he knew of. Then a memory surfaced, something from about 6 months ago. "Rodriguez, you remember that shipment that went missing from the Baton Rouge depot? The one where they suspected an inside job?" "Sure. Cost the company nearly $500,000. I was the one who noticed the discrepancies in the logging system. I reported it to corporate, remember? That investigation led to 2 people getting fired from logistics." "Jesus, you think this is revenge? One of those people who got fired, what was his name? Tall, thin guy, always seemed nervous." Rodriguez was typing again. "Harrison Blackstone. But Zachariah, that can't be the same person as Bartholomew Ashford. Can't it? Get someone to pull both employment photos, compare them. While Rodriguez worked on that, Zachariah paced the small lounge, pieces falling into place. If Bartholomew was really Harrison Blackstone, if he'd come back under a false identity to infiltrate the company again, then this wasn't just about stealing cargo. This was personal. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez called back, his voice tight with anger. "You were right. Facial recognition confirms it. Bartholomew Ashford is Harrison Blackstone. He must have gotten fake credentials and our HR department didn't catch it. He's been working with us for 3 months, plenty of time to gather intelligence and plan his revenge. And Magnolia's crew was his weapon. Looks that way. Zachariah, I'm upgrading your situation to a security threat. The company's sending a professional driver to take your truck and cargo. You're flying home tonight, and we're putting security on your house until this is resolved. This is insane. All because I did my job and reported theft? Some people don't handle consequences well. Listen, there's a corporate security team heading to the truck stop now. They'll escort you to the airport. Don't go anywhere alone, understand?" As Zachariah waited for the security team, he sat in the lounge thinking about how quickly a routine run had turned into a nightmare. Somewhere out there, Harrison Blackstone, now calling himself Bartholomew, was working with Magnolia's crew to target other drivers. They had information, resources, and a proven willingness to use violence. And they had his personal information, knew where he lived, where his daughter worked, where his grandkids went to school. The thought terrified him more than the attack itself had. The corporate security team arrived 2 hours later, 2 former military types in black SUVs who treated the situation with the seriousness it deserved. They checked Zachariah's truck for tracking devices, finding 2 hidden GPS units that would have allowed Magnolia's crew to follow him anywhere. They conducted a security sweep of the truck stop, identifying several vehicles that had been circling the lot since morning, probably surveillance. Mr. Crenshaw, the lead security officer, a woman named Torres, said quietly, "We believe they're still watching you. We're going to create a diversion. One of my team will drive your truck out with a police escort, make it look like you're leaving. Meanwhile, we'll take you out the back in a different vehicle." The plan worked perfectly. As Zachariah watched from the back seat of an unmarked sedan, his truck pulled out of the lot with 2 police cars flanking it. Almost immediately, 3 vehicles that had been parked nearby started their engines and followed. Torres smiled grimly. "That confirms it. They were waiting for you to leave. But they're following an empty truck now. By the time they realize you're not in it, you'll be at the airport." The ride to Louis Armstrong International Airport was tense but uneventful. Torres kept checking mirrors, taking seemingly random turns, doubling back twice to ensure they weren't being followed. At the airport, she walked him all the way to the security checkpoint. "Corporate's taking this very seriously," she said. "We've got teams looking for Blackstone and gathering intelligence on Magnolia's operation. You did the right thing reporting this, Mr. Crenshaw. These people are dangerous, but now we know about them. What about other drivers? The ones who don't know they're being targeted? Alerts have gone out across the industry. Truck stops are increasing security, and law enforcement has been notified from here to Houston. It's not perfect, but it's something." As Zachariah went through airport security, his phone buzzed with another unknown number. Against his better judgment, he opened the message. It was a photo of his truck at the Flying J, taken from a distance. Underneath, text read, "We know you're not in it. Clever. But this isn't over." He showed it to Torres, who immediately took his phone to forward the message to her team and the FBI. "They're getting sloppy," she said. "Emotional. That's good for us. Emotional criminals make mistakes." 3 hours later, Zachariah was on a plane to Shreveport, watching the Louisiana coastline disappear beneath clouds. He'd been on hundreds of flights over the years, but this one felt different. He wasn't just leaving after a completed job, he was fleeing, being driven from roads he'd traveled for decades by criminals who saw him as either a target or a loose end. His phone, returned by Torres after being cleared by security, showed dozens of messages from fellow truckers who'd heard about the attack. Some offered support, others shared their own close calls, and many expressed anger that one of their own had been targeted. The Brotherhood of the Road was rallying, and that gave Zachariah some comfort. But as the plane climbed higher, he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Magnolia and Bartholomew were still out there, still operating, still planning. And now it was personal for them too. He'd escaped, embarrassed them, brought attention to their operation. People like that didn't forgive easily. When the plane landed in Shreveport, Zachariah's son-in-law Marcus was waiting at the gate, looking concerned. Corporate had called him, explained the situation, and Marcus had immediately taken time off work to help with security. On the drive home, he peppered Zachariah with questions, trying to understand how a simple trucking job had turned into something from a crime thriller. "These people actually tried to kill you? They tried to rob me. I don't know if they would have killed me, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. And now they have our address? Corporate security says the house is being watched. There are people protecting us. It's going to be okay." But even as he said it, Zachariah wasn't sure he believed it. People like Magnolia didn't just give up. They adapted, planned, waited for the right moment. And Bartholomew, or Harrison, or whatever his real name was, had already proven he could play a long game, infiltrating the company months after being fired just to set up his revenge. That night, Zachariah sat in his living room, all the lights on. A baseball bat within reach even though he knew it was probably useless. Every car that drove by made him tense. Every unexpected sound made him reach for his phone. This was no way to live, but until Magnolia's crew was caught, it was his reality. Around midnight his phone rang. Rodriguez again, and he sounded excited. "Zachariah, we got him. Bartholomew, I mean. State police caught him trying to cross into Texas. He had a car full of our company files and $50,000 in cash." "Is he talking?" "Not yet, but the FBI is working on him. They've got enough evidence to put him away for years just on the corporate espionage charges. If they can get him to flip on Magnolia's crew, this whole thing might unravel." It was good news, the first real good news since the attack. But Zachariah knew Bartholomew was just one piece of a larger puzzle. Magnolia was still out there, and she'd built her operation long before Bartholomew came along with his inside information. She'd find other sources, other targets, other ways to operate. "Rodriguez, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time I found a different line of work." There was a long pause. "You're serious?" "I'm 58 years old. I've been doing this since I was 31. Maybe this is a sign it's time to hang up the keys. Don't make any decisions while you're still shaken up. Take some time, think about it. The company will support whatever you decide, but Zachariah, you're one of our best drivers. It would be a shame to let these criminals drive you from a job you love." After the call ended, Zachariah stood at his window, looking out at the quiet Shreveport street where he'd lived for 15 years. Somewhere out there, hundreds of truckers were on the road right now, delivering the goods that kept America running. They were dealing with weather, traffic, fatigue, and now apparently organized crime rings with inside information. 3 weeks passed in relative quiet. Zachariah had started to believe maybe it really was over, that Bartholomew's arrest had disrupted Magnolia's operation enough to make her back off. The security detail at his house had been reduced to periodic check-ins, and life was beginning to return to something resembling normal. He was even considering Rodriguez's standing offer to return to work, maybe taking shorter local runs to ease back into it. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday morning when his daughter Rebecca called him in a panic. "Dad, there was a woman at Katie's school asking about you." Zachariah's blood went cold. Katie was his 8-year-old granddaughter. "What do you mean, asking about me?" The principal just called. A woman showed up claiming to be from a trucking magazine, said she was doing a story about long-haul drivers and their families. She specifically asked if Katie was your granddaughter, said she'd heard you were some kind of hero driver who'd stopped a hijacking. "Red hair?" "Yes." "Dad, how did you know that?" "Get Katie out of school right now. I'm calling corporate security." Within an hour, Zachariah's quiet retirement plans were forgotten. Corporate security descended on Shreveport like an invasion force. Torres was back, and this time she brought a full team. They moved Rebecca and her family to a secure location, increased surveillance on Zachariah's house, and began coordinating with local law enforcement. "She's escalating," Torres explained during a briefing at the safe house. "This isn't about cargo anymore. This is personal. She's sending a message that she can reach you anywhere, through anyone." "But why?" Zachariah asked. "Bartholomew's in custody. He's the one who wanted revenge, not her. Our intelligence suggests Magnolia and Bartholomew had become close, possibly romantically involved. His arrest might have triggered this escalation, or maybe she sees you as the reason her operation is now under scrutiny. Either way, you've become her focus." The FBI agent assigned to the case, a young man named Donnelly, spread photos across the table. They were surveillance shots from various locations around Louisiana and Texas, all showing the same red-haired woman. But her appearance changed in each photo. Different clothes, different styles, sometimes wearing glasses or hats. She was a chameleon. "We've identified her as Margaret Louise Nobles, 34 years old, originally from Mobile, Alabama. She's got a record going back to her teens: theft, assault, conspiracy. She disappeared from the system about 5 years ago, right around the time the cargo thefts started increasing in this region." "So Magnolia is just a street name," Zachariah said, studying the photos. "Appears so. She's smart, careful, and completely ruthless. We've linked her crew to at least 12 murders, all drivers or warehouse workers who got in their way. You're lucky to be alive, Mr. Crenshaw." "I don't feel lucky. I feel like a target." "You are a target," Torres said bluntly, "which is why we're proposing something unusual. We want to use you as bait." The room went quiet. Rebecca, who'd been sitting in the corner trying to process all of this, stood up angrily. "Absolutely not. Haven't you people put him through enough?" "Hear us out," Agent Donnelly said. "Magnolia's getting desperate. Bartholomew's in custody, her operation is compromised, and she's taking risks she wouldn't normally take. Showing up at your granddaughter's school was sloppy, emotional. If we can draw her out in a controlled situation, we can end this." "What kind of controlled situation?" Zachariah asked, though he already had an idea. "You go back to work. Take a high-value shipment through New Orleans. We'll leak the information through channels we know she monitors. When she makes her move, we'll be ready." "You want me to drive straight into another ambush?" "A controlled ambush. You'll have FBI agents and unmarked vehicles ahead and behind. State police will be on standby. Air support will be tracking from above. You'll be safer than the president." Zachariah looked at the photos of Magnolia again. In one, taken outside a truck stop in Mississippi, she was smiling at something off camera. It was the same cold smile he'd seen that night at the loading dock, the smile of someone who enjoyed causing fear. "If I do this and something goes wrong, my family, your family, will be in protective custody the entire time," Torres assured him. "We've done this before, Mr. Crenshaw. We know what we're doing." "Dad, you don't have to do this," Rebecca said. We can move, start over somewhere else. You've already been through enough. But Zachariah knew running wouldn't solve anything. People like Magnolia didn't just give up. They held grudges, nursed them, acted on them years later when you'd finally stopped looking over your shoulder. If there was a chance to end this now, he had to take it. "All right," he said finally. "I'll do it. But I have conditions." The plan took 2 weeks to set up. During that time, Zachariah underwent intensive training with Torres's team. They taught him defensive driving techniques, how to spot surveillance, what to do if the plan went sideways. They fitted him with a panic button that would immediately summon help, and his truck was equipped with hidden cameras and tracking devices that even the most thorough search wouldn't find. The shipment was real. $500,000 worth of computer processors destined for a tech company in Houston. The route would take him right through New Orleans, specifically through the same industrial district where the first attack had happened. It was like dangling a piece of meat in front of a hungry wolf. The information was leaked through a complicated chain that started with a careless conversation at a truck stop known to be frequented by people connected to Magnolia's crew. Within days, intelligence sources confirmed the bait had been taken. Communications chatter indicated Magnolia was planning something big, calling in resources from as far away as Atlanta. The night before the run, Zachariah couldn't sleep. He sat in the safe house, looking at photos of his family, wondering if he was making the right decision. Torres found him there at 3 a.m. "Second thoughts. Third and fourth thoughts," he admitted. "What if she doesn't take the bait? What if she does, but something goes wrong?" "Something always goes wrong," Torres said, sitting down across from him. "That's why we plan for contingencies. But Zachariah, you need to understand something. Whether you do this or not, Magnolia's going to keep coming. People like her, they don't just walk away. The only difference is whether we face her on our terms or hers." The next morning, Zachariah climbed into the cab of a company truck. His own was still in evidence lockup, and started the pre-trip inspection. Everything looked normal, felt normal, but he knew that within a mile radius, at least a dozen law enforcement officers were watching. A helicopter was already in the air, though far enough away that its rotor noise wouldn't be noticeable. The FBI had even placed undercover agents at the truck stops along his route. He pulled out of the secure lot at exactly 8 a.m., merging onto Interstate 49 south toward Lafayette, then onto I-10 east toward New Orleans. For the first 2 hours, everything was routine. Traffic was moderate, weather was clear, and his escort vehicles maintained perfect spacing, never obvious, but always there. The first sign something was happening came just outside of Baton Rouge. A motorcycle had been following him for the last 20 miles, hanging back but matching his speed perfectly. When he changed lanes, it changed lanes. When he slowed down, it slowed down. "We see him," Torres's voice came through his earpiece. "Stay calm, maintain speed. That's reconnaissance, not the main force." Sure enough, the motorcycle eventually peeled off at an exit, probably reporting his position and speed to someone ahead. Zachariah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. It was starting. As he approached New Orleans, more vehicles began showing interest in his truck. A white van paced him for several miles before falling back. A sedan with tinted windows appeared and disappeared in his mirrors. They were checking for surveillance, looking for the trap they probably suspected but couldn't confirm. "Multiple vehicles converging on your position," Torres reported. "Looks like she brought everyone. Count at least 8 vehicles so far." 8 vehicles meant probably 16 to 20 people, all focused on him. Despite all the protection around him, Zachariah felt very alone in that cab. He was the cheese in the mousetrap, and the mice were armed and dangerous. The industrial district exit was coming up. This was where the first attack had happened, where Magnolia had almost gotten him. As he took the exit, his mouth went dry. The familiar landscape of abandoned warehouses and empty lots stretched out before him, looking even more desolate in the harsh afternoon sun. "Target vehicles are accelerating," Torres said, tension creeping into her voice. "They're going to make their move soon. All units stand by." Zachariah maintained his speed, trying to look like just another trucker making a delivery. But his heart was pounding so hard he was sure the hidden microphones could pick it up. In his mirrors, he could see vehicles closing in from multiple directions. Then he saw her. Magnolia was in a black SUV that pulled alongside him at a traffic light. She was wearing sunglasses, but he knew it was her. The red hair was darker now, pulled back in a tight ponytail. But the shape of her face, the way she held herself, it was definitely her. She looked directly at him, and even through the sunglasses he could feel her stare. She smiled that cold smile and drew her finger across her throat, the same gesture from that night weeks ago. Then her window went up and the light turned green. "Visual confirmation on Magnolia," Zachariah reported. Surprised, his voice was steady. "Black SUV, Louisiana plates. We've got her. All units prepare to execute. Zachariah, in about 30 seconds, we need you to turn into the warehouse complex on your right. Can you do that?" "Copy that." The 30 seconds felt like 30 minutes. Vehicles were now surrounding him, boxing him in just like they had during the first attack. But this time, he wasn't alone. This time, the hunters were about to become the hunted. He turned into the warehouse complex, a maze of old buildings and loading docks that the FBI had secretly secured the day before. The vehicles followed him in, and that's when the trap was sprung. FBI vehicles erupted from concealed positions, sirens blaring, lights flashing. A helicopter dropped low, its spotlight illuminating the entire area. Voice amplified through loudspeakers commanded everyone to stop their vehicles and exit with hands visible. For a moment, it looked like Magnolia's crew might comply. Several vehicles stopped, doors opened. Then everything went to hell. Magnolia's SUV suddenly reversed at high speed, ramming an FBI vehicle before spinning around and racing toward a gap in the perimeter. 2 other vehicles followed suit, engines screaming as they tried to escape. Gunfire erupted as someone in one of the fleeing vehicles shot at the helicopter, forcing it to bank away sharply. "Get to cover!" Torres shouted through the earpiece. "Now!" Zachariah didn't need to be told twice. He pulled the truck behind a concrete loading dock and threw himself flat across the seats as bullets shattered his passenger window. The firefight outside was intense but brief. Within minutes, the shooting stopped, replaced by shouting voices and sirens. "Zachariah, you okay?" Torres's voice was breathless. "Yeah, I'm good. Did you get her?" There was a pause. "We got most of them. 6 vehicles stopped, 15 suspects in custody. But Magnolia and 2 other vehicles escaped. We're in pursuit." Zachariah sat up carefully, glass from the broken window crunching under him. Through his windshield, he could see FBI agents rounding up members of Magnolia's crew, forcing them to the ground, securing weapons. It was a significant victory, but it felt hollow knowing Magnolia had escaped. The pursuit lasted 3 hours. Magnolia led law enforcement on a chase through 3 parishes, switching vehicles twice, using her knowledge of the backroads to stay ahead. But she couldn't shake the helicopter, and eventually she ran out of room to run. State police spike strips took out her tires on a rural road near Slidell. The SUV skidded into a ditch, and Magnolia emerged shooting. The firefight was brief but intense. When it was over, Magnolia was on the ground, wounded but alive, finally in custody. Torres called Zachariah with the news that evening. He was back at the safe house, still processing everything that had happened. She's in the hospital under heavy guard, GSW to the shoulder and leg, but she'll survive to stand trial. We also rounded up the 2 vehicles that initially escaped with her. All told, we arrested 23 people today, seized 14 vehicles, and recovered enough evidence to put them all away for life. Is it really over? It's over. Magnolia, or rather, Margaret Nobles, is facing federal charges for murder, racketeering, conspiracy, attempted murder of a federal witness, that's you, and about a dozen other charges. She's never getting out. What about Bartholomew? Singing like a canary. He's so scared of Magnolia that he's giving us everything. Names, dates, methods, the whole operation. Turns out this went deeper than we thought. They had connections in multiple shipping companies, were bribing security guards, even had a few cops on the payroll. Zachariah sat back in his chair, feeling a weight he'd been carrying for over a month finally lifting. So what happens now? Now you get your life back. We'll maintain security for a few more weeks just to be safe, but the threat is neutralized. You can go back to work, or retire, or whatever you want to do. 2 days later, Zachariah was sitting on his porch in Shreveport, watching his granddaughter Katie play in the yard. The security detail was gone, the safe house was no longer needed, and life was returning to normal. But he knew he'd never be quite the same. Rodriguez called that afternoon. "So, have you thought about coming back?" "I have," Zachariah said, watching Katie chase a butterfly across the grass. "And I think I'm done, Rodriguez. 27 years was a good run, but it's time to hang up the keys. I understand. For what it's worth, the company's putting together a commendation for you. What you did helped to take down a major criminal organization. You're a hero, Zachariah." "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like a guy who got lucky. Sometimes that's the same thing." After the call, Zachariah sat on the porch thinking about the road. He'd driven millions of miles, seen every state, met thousands of people. It had been a good career, an honest living. But the road had changed, or maybe he'd just finally seen the darkness that had always been there, hiding in the shadows of abandoned warehouses and empty rest stops. A week later, he received a package with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping about Magnolia's arrest and upcoming trial. Someone had circled a quote from her where she said, "That trucker, Zachariah Crenshaw, cost me everything. If I ever get out, he's the first person I'm coming for." At the bottom of the clipping, someone had written in red ink, "She has friends, watch your back." Zachariah showed it to the FBI, who increased security again and traced the package to a post office in Mobile, Alabama, Magnolia's hometown. They never found who sent it, but the message was clear. Even with Magnolia in prison, even with her crew disbanded, there were still people out there who held grudges. But Zachariah refused to live in fear. He'd faced down Magnolia and her crew, had helped bring them to justice. If others wanted to come for him, they'd find him ready. He installed a security system at his house, got his concealed carry permit, and stayed in touch with Torres and the FBI team. 6 months had passed since Magnolia's arrest, and Zachariah had settled into retirement better than he'd expected. He spent his days working on his truck in the garage. Not a semi, but an old Ford pickup he was restoring, and his evenings with family. The nightmares had mostly stopped, though he still occasionally woke up hearing that metallic tapping on aluminum siding. The trial had been all over the news. Margaret Louise Nobles, a.k.a. Magnolia, had been sentenced to life without parole on multiple counts of murder, racketeering, and conspiracy. Bartholomew, or Harrison Blackstone as the court documents listed him, got 25 years in exchange for his cooperation. The entire crew had been dismantled, its members either in prison or scattered to the wind. Zachariah had testified via video link. the prosecutor not wanting to risk bringing him to New Orleans, even with security. Magnolia had stared at the screen the entire time he spoke, never blinking, that cold smile playing at the corners of her mouth. When the judge read the verdict, she'd laughed, actually laughed, and said something to her lawyer that made him go pale. Now, on a humid Thursday evening in September, Zachariah was under his truck changing the oil when his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but that wasn't unusual. He'd been getting calls from journalists wanting to write about his story, true crime podcasters wanting interviews. He usually ignored them, but something made him answer this one. "Mr. Crenshaw." The voice was female, young, nervous. "Yes? My name is Evangeline Thibodeau. I was Magnolia's cousin. Please don't hang up." Zachariah slid out from under the truck, every nerve suddenly alert. "What do you want?" "To warn you, and maybe to apologize, though I know that doesn't mean much. Can we meet? I have information you need to hear." "I'm calling the FBI. Please don't, not yet. I'm not part of her crew, I never was. But I know things about what she set in motion before she got arrested. There are people still out there, Mr. Crenshaw. People she paid in advance to finish what she started." Zachariah was already reaching for his other phone to call Torres, but something in the girl's voice made him pause. She sounded genuinely scared, not threatening. "Where are you?" "Shreveport. I drove here from Mobile. I'm at the diner on Line Avenue, the one that's open 24 hours. Can you meet me here? Public place, lots of people. You can bring whoever you want for protection." "How do I know this isn't a trap?" "You don't. But Mr. Crenshaw, if I wanted to hurt you, would I call first? Would I give you my real name? I'm 22 years old, I'm a nursing student, and I want nothing to do with my cousin's business, but I can't let innocent people get hurt because of what I know." Against his better judgment, Zachariah agreed to meet her, but he wasn't going alone. He called Torres immediately, and within an hour, a plan was in place. He'd meet Evangeline, but FBI agents would be positioned throughout the diner, and local police would be on standby outside. The diner was exactly as Evangeline had described. Brightly lit, half full of customers even at 9 in the evening. She was easy to spot, sitting alone in a corner booth, nervously shredding napkins. She looked nothing like Magnolia. Dark hair instead of red, soft features instead of sharp ones, and eyes that held fear instead of cold calculation. When Zachariah slid into the booth across from her, she looked up with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for coming. I know you have no reason to trust me. You're right about that, so talk." Evangeline pulled out a worn notebook, her hands shaking. Margaret, Magnolia. She wasn't just running a theft ring. She was building something bigger. She had this vision of controlling all the cargo movement through the Gulf Coast, becoming some kind of underground shipping queen. The thefts were just the beginning, a way to fund the larger operation. The FBI knows all this. No, they don't. Not all of it. She opened the notebook, revealing pages of names, dates, and dollar amounts. Before she was arrested, she moved money, a lot of money, to accounts the FBI doesn't know about. She used that money to put contracts on specific people. People who had crossed her, who had cost her money or reputation. Contracts? You mean hits? Evangeline nodded. Your name is at the top of the list. $50,000 to whoever completes the job. But here's what makes it worse. She didn't hire professionals. She spread the word through prison networks offering the money to anyone willing to try. So you don't have one assassin coming for you, Mr. Crenshaw. You have potentially dozens of random criminals who might take a shot at the bounty. Zachariah felt the blood drain from his face. This was worse than dealing with Magnolia's organized crew. At least they had been a known enemy with predictable methods. This was chaos. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm not her," Evangeline said fiercely. "My whole life, people compared me to Margaret. Same family, same blood, must be the same person, but I'm not. I'm trying to be a nurse, to help people, to be everything she wasn't. When I found out about the contracts, she had me listed as an emergency contact, and her lawyer contacted me about some of her affairs. I knew I had to warn the people she targeted." "People? There are others?" "5 names total. You're the first I've been able to locate." She showed him the list. Besides his name, there were 4 others, including a prosecutor from Houston, a rival crew leader from Mississippi, a former member of her crew who had turned informant, and surprisingly, Bartholomew himself. She put a hit on Bartholomew? Her own partner? She blamed him for getting caught. Said if he hadn't been sloppy with his revenge plan against you, none of this would have happened. The way she saw it, everyone on this list betrayed her somehow. Torres had been listening through a wire Zachariah was wearing, and now she entered the diner, sliding in next to him. Evangeline tensed, but didn't run. "Miss Thibodeau, I'm Agent Torres with the FBI. We need everything you have." For the next 2 hours, Evangeline laid out everything she knew. The account numbers were in offshore banks, untouchable by U.S. law enforcement. The contracts had been spread through a network of prison contacts, former crew members, and criminal associates across 5 states. Some had already been activated. The prosecutor in Houston had reported 3 suspicious incidents in the last month. "We can put you in protective custody," Torres told Evangeline when she was done. "No, I'm not hiding. I've applied to transfer to a nursing school in Seattle, as far from the Gulf Coast as I can get. I leave tomorrow. I just needed to do this first, to try to make something right." She looked at Zachariah. "I know you probably hate my whole family because of what Margaret did, but we're not all like her. My grandmother, Margaret's aunt, she died of shame when she heard about the murders, said she'd failed somewhere in raising her. The rest of us, we just want to forget she ever existed." After Evangeline left, Torres and Zachariah sat in the diner discussing the implications. The FBI would investigate, try to track down anyone who might have taken the contracts, but it was like trying to catch smoke. The money was out there, the word was out there, and somewhere people were making plans. "We can put you back in protective custody," Torres offered. "For how long? The rest of my life? I can't live like that." "Then what do you want to do?" Zachariah thought about it. He was tired of running, tired of hiding, tired of being afraid. "I want to be ready. Increase security at the house, keep the alert systems active. But I'm not going into hiding. If they come, they come." Over the next few weeks, life took on a strange new normal. Zachariah went about his routine, but with heightened awareness. He varied his routes, never kept a predictable schedule. Always checked his vehicles for tampering. Torres had arranged for periodic check-ins from local law enforcement, and his neighbors had been quietly informed to report any suspicious activity. The first attempt came 3 weeks after the meeting with Evangeline. Zachariah was at a hardware store when he noticed a man following him through the aisles. Young guy, maybe 25, trying too hard to look casual while keeping Zachariah in sight. When Zachariah went to the parking lot, the man followed, hand reaching into his jacket. But Zachariah had been trained by Torres's team. He hit his panic button, dropped behind a car, and within 90 seconds police sirens were screaming into the parking lot. The man ran, but was caught 2 blocks away. He had a loaded pistol and a printed photo of Zachariah with the dollar amount written on it. The second attempt was more subtle. Someone tried to break into his house while he was at his daughter's for dinner. The security system alerted him and the police, and they arrived to find a woman trying to disable his truck's brake lines. She was a meth addict from Arkansas who'd heard about the bounty through her dealer. Each attempt was handled, each attacker arrested. But Zachariah knew this couldn't go on forever. The FBI was working to track the source of the bounty information, but it had spread too far, mutated like a virus through the criminal underworld. The amount had even grown in the telling. Some versions had it at 100,000, others at 250,000. Then, 4 months after Evangeline's warning, Zachariah got another unexpected call. "Mr. Crenshaw, this is Warden Patterson at the Louisiana State Penitentiary. I'm calling about Margaret Nobles." "What about her?" "She's dead, killed in her cell last night. Another inmate dispute over contraband. Thought you should know." Zachariah didn't know how to feel. Relief? Satisfaction? It all just felt empty. "Thank you for telling me. There's more. We found writings in her cell, lots of them. Pages and pages about you, about her crew, about her plans. The FBI is collecting it all, but Mr. Crenshaw, this woman was obsessed with you. Genuinely, clinically obsessed. The news of Magnolia's death made the papers, a small item in the back pages. Convicted crime boss killed in prison fight. But for Zachariah, it didn't bring the closure he'd expected. The bounties were still out there. The money still waiting for anyone desperate or crazy enough to try. Torres called that evening. "We've confirmed the death, and we've got something interesting. The inmate who killed her was connected to the Mississippi crew leader she'd put a bounty on. Looks like someone decided to collect on a different contract. So they're turning on each other now? Seems like it. The criminal underground doesn't like this bounty system. It's too chaotic, draws too much police attention. Word is that some of the older, more established crews are actively discouraging people from pursuing the contracts." It was strange justice, Zachariah thought. Magnolia's own methods, her chaos and violence, had ultimately turned her world against her. A year passed. The attempts slowed, then stopped. Either the word had gotten out that it wasn't worth it, or the pool of people willing to try had dried up. Zachariah maintained his security precautions but started to relax a little. He even took a road trip with his wife, driving the restored Ford pickup along the Gulf Coast, reclaiming highways that had once been scenes of terror. They stopped at a truck stop outside of Mobile, and Zachariah found himself looking at the big rigs, feeling a pull he hadn't expected. A driver, an older black woman, noticed him staring. "You a driver?" she asked. "Was. Retired about a year ago. Miss it? Sometimes. Not the danger, not the long hours, but the freedom, the road." She smiled. "The road never really leaves you, does it? It gets in your blood." As they drove on, Zachariah thought about that. The road had nearly killed him, had brought violence and fear into his life. But it had also been his life for 27 years. Every mile had been a story. Every delivery a small victory against distance and time. 2 years after Magnolia's death, Zachariah got one final visit related to the case. Evangeline Thibodeau, now a registered nurse in Seattle, was back in Louisiana for a wedding. She asked to meet him, and this time, there was no fear in the invitation. They met at a coffee shop in downtown Shreveport. She looked different, confident, professional, at peace. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for listening to me that night, for not judging me for my cousin's crimes. You're not responsible for what she did. I know that now. Therapy helped." She smiled sadly. "I also wanted you to know that I've been working with the FBI to help identify and locate the remaining bounty holders. Most have been arrested or have abandoned the idea. The last confirmed attempt was over a year ago. So it's really over? As over as these things ever are. There might always be someone out there who heard the story, who thinks they can make a quick score, but the organized threat is gone. They talked for a while longer about their lives, their families, the strange path that had brought them together. When they parted, Evangeline handed him something, a photo. This was Margaret when she was 8 years old, before everything went wrong. I thought you should see that she was human once, just a little girl with dreams. I don't know what turned her into Magnolia, what darkness took hold of her, but I wanted you to know that the monster who terrorized you wasn't all she ever was. Zachariah looked at the photo. A smiling, red-haired girl at a birthday party, cake on her face, surrounded by other children. No hint of the cold-blooded killer she would become. He handed it back. Keep it. Remember her however you need to. I've made my peace. That night, Zachariah sat on his porch, watching the stars. Rebecca came out and sat beside him. You okay, Dad? Yeah, just thinking. About? About how life takes turns you never expect. One day, you're just a trucker hauling electronics. The next, you're in the middle of something out of a crime movie. And then somehow, you come out the other side. Do you regret any of it? Taking that run, I mean? Zachariah thought about it. The terror, the violence, the months of fear. He wouldn't wish those on anyone. But it had also shown him something about himself, that when pushed to the very edge, he had found courage he didn't know he possessed. No regrets, he said finally. We don't get to choose what happens to us, just how we respond to it. And I'm still here, still standing. A semi rumbled by on the distant highway, its lights cutting through the darkness. Zachariah watched it pass, remembering countless nights behind the wheel, the rhythm of the road, the solitude and the freedom. That life was behind him now, but it had shaped him, prepared him for a battle he'd never seen coming. 5 years have passed since that night in the industrial district of New Orleans. Zachariah still lives in the same house, still works on old trucks in his garage, still has dinner with his family every Sunday. The security system remains, updated but rarely triggered now, except by the occasional raccoon. The FBI keeps him informed of relevant developments. Several members of Magnolia's crew have been released and immediately violated parole, ending up back in prison. Bartholomew, now Harrison again, is serving his time quietly, reportedly finding religion. The prosecutor in Houston who was on the hit list is now a federal judge. The informant entered witness protection and disappeared. The rival crew leader was killed in an unrelated gang dispute. Sometimes Zachariah gets calls from truckers who've heard his story, wanting advice about safety, about dealing with fear on the road. He tells them to trust their instincts, to never park in isolated areas, to maintain communication with dispatch and other drivers. The brotherhood of the road, he tells them, is their best protection against the darkness that sometimes lurks in the shadows of America's highways. On quiet nights when sleep won't come, Zachariah sometimes thinks he hears it, that metallic tapping that started everything. But it's just memory, just the echo of a terror that once was but no longer holds power over him. He faced down a monster named Magnolia and survived. Whatever comes next, whatever the road of life throws at him, he knows he can handle it. The road never really leaves you. It changes you, marks you, becomes part of who you are. For 27 years, Zachariah Crenshaw was a trucker, moving America's goods from one place to another. For one terrifying period, he was a target, a name on a hit list, a man looking over his shoulder. Now, he's something else, a survivor, a grandfather. A man who knows that sometimes the most ordinary life can take an extraordinary turn. And somewhere out there on the dark highways of America, truckers are still driving through the night, pushing through exhaustion and isolation to keep the country moving. Most will never face what Zachariah faced. But if they do, if they find themselves in that moment when the tapping starts and the shadows move, maybe they'll remember his story. Maybe they'll hit that CB radio, call for help, and find that they're not alone. The brotherhood of the road endures, and so does Zachariah Crenshaw, retired trucker, survivor, and proof that sometimes, against all odds, the good guys win. But late at night, when the wind rattles the windows just right, when a branch scrapes against the siding of his house, Zachariah still reaches for the baseball bat he keeps beside his bed. Some habits, born from terror and survival, never quite fade away. And perhaps that's how it should be. The world has darkness in it. People like Magnolia who prey on others, who bring violence and fear to ordinary lives. Being ready, being aware isn't paranoia. It's wisdom earned through hard experience. The story ends here, but life goes on. Every morning, Zachariah wakes up grateful for another day, another chance to hold his grandchildren, another opportunity to work on his trucks and feel the sun on his face. He won the battle against Magnolia and her crew, but more importantly, he won the war for his own peace of mind. The road is still out there, calling to younger drivers, offering its promises of freedom and adventure. And in truck stops and CB channels across America, the story is still told sometimes, about the trucker who faced down the Magnolia crew and lived to tell about it. It's become part of trucker lore, a cautionary tale with a rare happy ending. Zachariah Crenshaw is home. He is safe. He is free. But he never forgets the lessons of that night in New Orleans, when the tapping started and his whole world changed. Some experiences leave marks that never fully heal, shadows that never completely fade. And maybe that's the real truth of survival. You don't get to go back to who you were before. You can only go forward, changed but not broken, scarred but not defeated. The road taught him that. Magnolia taught him that. And now, in his retirement, it's a lesson he'll carry until his last day. The hazmat placard on the overturned tanker read 1789, hydrochloric acid, corrosive. But Phineas Blackwood couldn't see it clearly through the thick, acrid smoke billowing from the wreckage. He'd been following the tanker truck for the last 40 miles on Interstate 10, maintaining a respectful distance as they both pushed through the humid Louisiana night toward New Orleans. Now, at 2:47 a.m. on a stretch of highway between Lafayette and Baton Rouge, that tanker was on its side, blocking both eastbound lanes, and something was very, very wrong with the air. Phineas had been driving trucks for 19 years, mostly refrigerated goods up and down the Gulf Coast, and he'd seen plenty of accidents. But this one happened right in front of him. The tanker driver had swerved suddenly like he was avoiding something, overcorrected, and the whole rig had gone over in a cascade of sparks and grinding metal. Phineas had managed to stop his Peterbilt about 60 feet from the wreck, but now he wished he'd stopped farther back, much farther. The smell hit him first, even through the closed cab of his truck. It was sharp, metallic, wrong. Like battery acid mixed with chlorine and something else. Something that made his nose burn and his eyes water instantly. He reached for his CB radio, his hand already beginning to shake slightly, though he didn't notice it yet. Breaker, breaker, emergency traffic on I-10 eastbound, mile marker 127. Major hazmat situation, tanker truck overturned, chemical leak. Need immediate assistance, fire department and hazmat team required. Any copy? Static crackled back, then a voice, distant and breaking up. 10-4 on the emergency traffic. This is Unit 88, contacting emergency services. Advise all traffic to maintain distance. What's your 20, driver? I am approximately 60 feet from the wreck, stopped on the shoulder. The air... Something's wrong with the air here. My eyes are burning. Get out of there, driver. Move upwind immediately. But even as Phineas reached for his gear shift, he saw movement near the overturned tanker. The driver was trying to crawl out of his cab, one arm clearly broken, dragging himself across the asphalt. Without thinking, Phineas grabbed the emergency flashlight from his dashboard and opened his door. The moment the outside air hit him fully, he knew he'd made a terrible mistake. It was like breathing fire. The chemical vapor, invisible but thick in the air, attacked his lungs immediately. He started coughing, violent spasms that made him double over. But the other driver was still crawling, still trying to get away from his truck, and Phineas couldn't just leave him there. Pulling his t-shirt up over his nose and mouth, a useless gesture, but instinct demanded it, Phineas ran toward the injured driver. Each breath was agony, his chest feeling like it was being scraped raw from the inside. His exposed skin began to tingle, then burn, as if he'd been splashed with acid. By the time he reached the tanker driver, his vision was blurring from tears and chemical irritation. "Can you walk?" Phineas gasped, his voice already hoarse. The tanker driver looked up, his face a mask of pain and terror. He was older, maybe 60, with blood running from a gash on his forehead. My leg can't." Phineas didn't wait for more explanation. He hooked his arms under the man's shoulders and started dragging him back toward his truck. It was only 60 feet, but it felt like miles. Each step was harder than the last, his muscles beginning to cramp and spasm. The burning sensation had spread from his lungs to his entire chest, and now he could taste metal in his mouth, copper and acid and something worse. They made it to Phineas's truck just as his legs gave out. He managed to push the injured driver up against the cab, then collapsed beside him, gasping for air that only brought more pain. In the distance, finally, he could hear sirens. Don't breathe deep," the tanker driver wheezed. "Hydrochloric, but there's more. Mixed load. Shouldn't have mixed them. Company said it was fine." "What else?" Phineas forced out between coughs that brought up phlegm tinged with pink. What else was in there? Phosphorus compounds. Some kind of industrial solvent. They shouldn't react, they said. But the heat from the crash, chemical reaction. Phineas knew enough about hazmat to understand what that meant. When chemicals that shouldn't be transported together mixed, especially with heat as a catalyst, they could create entirely new compounds. Toxic compounds. Deadly compounds. The first fire truck arrived 12 minutes later, followed by ambulances and state police. By then, Phineas couldn't stand on his own. His skin, where it had been exposed, was covered in small blisters, like a severe sunburn, but worse. His breathing was shallow and labored, each breath a conscious effort. The EMTs who approached wore full hazmat suits, their faces hidden behind respirators. "How long were you exposed?" one asked, his voice muffled by the equipment. "Maybe 5 minutes. Had to get him." Phineas gestured weakly toward the tanker driver, who was already being loaded onto a stretcher. "You're a hero, sir, but you should have stayed in your vehicle. We need to get you to the hospital immediately. You've been exposed to a cocktail of industrial chemicals. We don't even know yet what compounds were created in the reaction." As they loaded him into the ambulance, Phineas caught a glimpse of the accident scene. The hazmat team had set up a perimeter, their yellow suits ghostly in the emergency lights. The tanker was still on its side, and now he could see liquid pooling beneath it, eating into the asphalt like acid. Where the liquid met the shoulder of the road, the grass was already dead, turned black in an expanding circle. The ride to the hospital was a blur of oxygen masks and IV lines. The EMT kept asking him questions, his name, age, medical history. But talking was getting harder. His throat felt like it was swelling, and there was a strange numbness spreading through his chest. At Lafayette General, they rushed him directly into decontamination. 2 nurses in hazmat suits cut away his clothes, sprayed him with solutions that stung his already burning skin, then sprayed him again. Through it all, a doctor kept talking, explaining what they were doing, but Phineas couldn't focus on the words. His vision kept fading in and out, and there was a sound in his ears like rushing water. "Mr. Blackwood, we need to intubate," the doctor was saying. "Your airway is compromised from the chemical exposure. We're going to put you under for a while. Let your body rest while we figure out exactly what you were exposed to. Do you understand?" Phineas tried to nod, but the movement sent spasms of pain through his neck. The last thing he saw before the anesthesia took him was a nurse hanging an IV bag labeled with warnings he couldn't read, and the doctor on the phone, his face grave as he said something about unknown chemical compounds and potentially fatal exposure. When Phineas woke up, he didn't know how much time had passed. The intubation tube was gone, replaced by a nasal cannula providing oxygen. His throat felt raw, like he'd swallowed broken glass, but he could breathe on his own. The room was different, private, with monitors beeping steadily around him. Through the window, he could see it was daylight, but which day? A young doctor entered, Dr. Ambrose Hartley according to his badge, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that tried to be reassuring but didn't quite succeed. "Mr. Blackwood, good to see you awake. I'm Dr. Hartley. I've been overseeing your care. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," Phineas croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Then set on fire. "How long?" "You've been unconscious for 3 days. We had to keep you sedated while we treated the acute symptoms of chemical exposure. Mr. Blackwood, I need to be frank with you about your condition." 3 days. Phineas tried to process that. His refrigerated load was definitely ruined. His company would be furious, but the doctor's expression suggested those were the least of his problems. The tanker that crashed was carrying multiple industrial chemicals that should never have been transported together. When they mixed, they created a vapor cloud of chlorine gas, hydrogen chloride, and several organophosphate compounds. You were exposed to this mixture for approximately 5 to 7 minutes without any protective equipment. But I'm alive. Yes, and that's remarkable given the concentration you were exposed to. The tanker driver you saved, Mr. Morrison, he's alive too, largely thanks to you. But Mr. Blackwood, there's been significant damage to your respiratory system. Your lungs show chemical burns throughout the bronchial tubes. There's scarring in your esophagus. Your liver and kidneys are showing signs of toxic damage. Phineas stared at the ceiling, trying to understand what this meant. Will I get better?" Dr. Hartley hesitated, and that hesitation said everything. Some of the damage may heal with time and treatment, but some of it is permanent. You're going to need ongoing medical care, possibly for the rest of your life. Your lung capacity is currently at about 60% of normal. That may improve, but it's unlikely to ever fully recover. Can I still drive? Mr. Blackwood, right now you can barely walk to the bathroom without oxygen support. Driving a commercial vehicle, that's not something we can even discuss for months, possibly ever. The words hit harder than the chemical exposure had. Driving wasn't just his job, it was who he was. 19 years on the road, millions of miles, and now it might all be over because he'd stopped to help someone. "I want to make some calls," Phineas said. "My family, my company." "Of course. But there's something else you should know. The company that operated the tanker, Pelican Chemical Transport, their insurance is already trying to contact you. So is a lawyer representing other victims, and the EPA wants to talk to you about what you observed. This incident is becoming complicated." Complicated, that was an understatement. Over the next few days, as Phineas slowly regained enough strength to sit up and eat solid food, he learned just how complicated. The chemical spill had contaminated a 2-mile stretch of Interstate 10. 3 other drivers who had passed through the vapor cloud before the road was closed were also hospitalized, though none as severely as Phineas. The cleanup was expected to take weeks and cost millions. Pelican Chemical Transport, it turned out, had a history of violations. They'd been cited multiple times for improper placarding, mixing incompatible chemicals, and using drivers without proper hazmat certification. The driver of the tanker, Morrison, admitted from his hospital bed that he'd known the load was dangerous, but had been threatened with termination if he refused to haul it. Phineas's first call was to his wife, Delilah. She'd already driven down from their home in Mobile and had been living in a motel near the hospital. When she walked into his room, the look on her face nearly broke him. She'd aged years in 3 days, worry lines etched deep around her eyes. "You stupid, brave fool," she said, taking his hand carefully, mindful of the IV lines. "You could have died. I couldn't leave him there. I know, that's who you are. But Finn, the doctors say, they say you might never fully recover. I know. We'll figure it out. Insurance, lawyers, whatever it takes. But you focus on getting better, you hear me?" His second call was to his dispatcher at Coolidge Freight Lines. Rodriguez, the same dispatcher who'd worked with Zachariah Crenshaw during his ordeal with Magnolia's crew years earlier, had moved to Coolidge after the stress of that incident. He listened to Phineas's account with growing anger. "Pelican Chemical Transport," Rodriguez said. "We've had problems with them before. Cowboys, all of them. Cutting corners, bribing inspectors. Finn, you need a good lawyer. Don't sign anything from their insurance without legal representation. I just wanted to help the driver. And you did. You saved his life. But now you need to think about your own life. If you can't drive again, that's permanent disability, lost wages, medical bills for life. Don't let them lowball you." The lawyer arrived the next day. Her name was Patricia Sterling, and she specialized in chemical exposure cases. She took one look at Phineas's medical chart and shook her head. "Mr. Blackwood, what you've been exposed to. There's no telling what the long-term effects might be. These organophosphate compounds, they can cause neurological damage that doesn't show up for months or even years. You need comprehensive monitoring, specialists, treatments that insurance might try to deny. I've seen cases like this before. What happened to those people?" She hesitated. Some recovered partially. Some developed chronic conditions, respiratory diseases, neurological disorders, cancers. The chemical cocktail you were exposed to, we don't have good data on it because it should never exist. It was created by negligence. So what do? We document everything. Every symptom, every treatment, every expense. We get statements from witnesses, from Morrison, from the emergency responders. And we build a case not just for current damages, but for future care. Because, Mr. Blackwood, I'm sorry to say, this is just the beginning of your medical journey." She was right. Over the next 2 weeks, as Phineas remained in the hospital, new symptoms appeared. Tremors in his hands that made holding a cup difficult. Periods of confusion where he couldn't remember where he was. Severe headaches that no medication seemed to touch. The neurologist they brought in, Dr. Sarah Winters, confirmed what Patricia Sterling had warned about. "The organophosphates have affected your nervous system," Dr. Winters explained, showing Phineas brain scans he didn't understand. "These chemicals are similar to nerve agents. In lower doses, they're used in pesticides. In the concentration you were exposed to, they can cause lasting neurological damage. Will it get worse? We don't know. Some patients stabilize, some deteriorate. We'll need to monitor you closely, run tests every few months. There are treatments that might help, but Mr. Blackwood, I need you to understand, your life is going to be different now." Different was an understatement. When they finally discharged him after 3 weeks, Phineas could barely recognize himself. He'd lost 30 pounds. His skin had a grayish tinge. He needed a walker to move more than a few steps, and even then he had to stop frequently to catch his breath. The strong, capable trucker who'd jumped out to save a stranger was gone, replaced by someone who looked decades older than his 43 years. The motel room in Mobile that became Phineas's world for the next month was a far cry from the cab of his Peterbilt. Delilah had tried to make it comfortable, bringing items from home, setting up a small medical station with his dozens of medications, installing grab bars in the bathroom, but nothing could hide the fact that this was where he'd come to hide from a life he could no longer live. The room faced the parking lot where big rigs occasionally stopped, and each time he heard the distinctive sound of air brakes releasing, something inside him died a little more. The medications were the worst part. 23 pills a day, each with its own side effects, each fighting a different aspect of the chemical damage. Bronchodilators for his lungs, steroids for the inflammation, antibiotics for the recurring respiratory infections, anti-seizure medications for the neurological symptoms, pain medications that barely touch the constant burning in his chest, and a host of supplements trying to support his damaged liver and kidneys. The morning ritual of sorting pills into their compartments took him nearly an hour with his shaking hands. Dr. Ambrose Hartley had arranged for him to see specialists at the University of South Alabama Medical Center, but each visit brought more bad news. The pulmonologist showed him images of his lungs, scarred tissue visible as white patches against what should have been clear black. The nephrologist warned that his kidney function was declining faster than expected. The neurologist documented increasing peripheral neuropathy, nerve damage that made his feet feel like they were constantly on fire while simultaneously being numb. Mr. Blackwood, the pulmonologist, Dr. Elizabeth Cray, said during one particularly difficult appointment, "I need to be honest with you. The scarring in your lungs is extensive and it's progressing. We're seeing signs of pulmonary fibrosis, likely triggered by the chemical exposure. This is a progressive condition." Progressive, meaning it gets worse? Yes. The rate varies by patient, but the trajectory is typically downward. We can slow it with treatment, manage symptoms, but we can't reverse the damage that's been done. How long? She hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the question. Without a lung transplant? Given the current rate of decline, we're looking at significant disability within 2 years, and, well, we'll do everything we can to maintain your quality of life. A lung transplant. As if that was a simple solution. As if he could afford it. As if he'd even qualify given the other organ damage. Phineas left that appointment feeling like he'd been handed a death sentence in slow motion. The legal battle with Pelican Chemical Transport was moving forward, but glacially. Patricia Sterling was building a comprehensive case, but the company was fighting every step. They claimed Phineas had acted recklessly by leaving his vehicle, that he'd ignored safety protocols, that his own negligence had contributed to his exposure. It was insulting, but it was also effective at delaying any settlement. Meanwhile, the bills were mounting. Even with his commercial driver's insurance, the copays and deductibles were crushing. Medications alone were costing $1,200 a month. Each specialist visit was a $300 copay. The motel room, necessary because their house in Mobile was a 2-story that he could no longer climb, was eating through their savings at $2,000 a month. Delilah had taken leave from her job as a school administrator to care for him, but that leave was unpaid after the first 2 weeks. They were hemorrhaging money with no income, and the disability claim through his employer was tied up in paperwork and appeals. "We could sell the house," Delilah suggested one evening as they sat over a dinner of takeout that Phineas could barely taste. another side effect of the chemical exposure. And go where? No one's going to rent to us without income verification. My sister in Pensacola, we're not moving in with your sister. I'm not going to be the dying brother-in-law in her spare bedroom. You're not dying, Finn. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. He was dying, just slowly, one organ system at a time. It was during one of his worst nights, when the pain in his chest felt like someone had poured molten lead into his lungs and his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a glass of water, that Phineas received an unexpected visitor. Cordelia Fitzgerald introduced herself as a patient advocate, but she was unlike any medical professional Phineas had encountered. She was young, maybe 30, with bright eyes and an energy that seemed to fill the small motel room. She worked for a nonprofit that helped victims of industrial accidents navigate the medical and legal systems. "Mr. Blackwood, I've been reviewing your case," she said, pulling out a tablet thick with digital files. "You're not getting the care you need, and you're not getting it because the system is designed to wear you down until you accept whatever scraps they offer. Tell me something I don't know. How about this? There's a specialist in Houston, Dr. Marcus Reeves, who's pioneering new treatments for chemical exposure victims. Experimental, but showing real promise. He's particularly interested in cases involving mixed chemical exposures like yours. Experimental means not covered by insurance. Normally, yes, but there's a provision in the Chemical Disaster Fund established after the Texas City refinery explosion. If we can prove your exposure was the result of gross negligence, which Pelican Chemical Transport's safety record certainly suggests, you could qualify for coverage under the fund." It was the first hope Phineas had felt in weeks. Cordelia spent the next 3 hours going through paperwork, making calls, setting up appointments. She knew every form, every loophole, every person to contact. By the time she left, Phineas had appointments scheduled with Dr. Reeves, applications submitted to 3 different assistance programs, and a plan for challenging the disability denial. "Why are you doing this?" Phineas asked as she packed up her materials. "Because someone needs to. Because you saved a man's life and the system is failing you. And because I've seen what happens to people who don't get help navigating this nightmare. They give up. They accept settlements that don't cover a fraction of their needs. They die broke and forgotten. You deserve better." The trip to Houston was a grueling 8-hour ordeal that would have taken Phineas 4 hours in his truck before the accident. Now, with Delilah driving and having to stop every hour for him to rest, use the bathroom, or deal with coughing fits that left him exhausted, it took them from sunrise to late afternoon. By the time they reached Dr. Reeves's clinic, Phineas was so depleted he could barely walk from the car to the entrance. Dr. Marcus Reeves was not what Phineas expected. He was younger than Dr. Hartley, with an intensity that bordered on manic. His clinic was part medical facility, part research lab, with equipment Phineas didn't recognize, and charts on the walls showing molecular structures and reaction pathways. "Mr. Blackwood, I've reviewed your entire file," Dr. Reeves said without preamble. "The chemical cocktail you were exposed to created at least 17 distinct toxic compounds, 3 of which we've never seen before in a clinical setting. Your body is essentially a case study in novel chemical poisoning. That's not exactly reassuring, Doc. It's not meant to be. But it does mean that traditional treatments are only addressing part of the problem. The protocols we use for standard chemical exposure aren't designed for what you're dealing with. However, I've been developing a treatment regimen that might help." The treatment Dr. Reeves proposed was aggressive and experimental. It involved chelation therapy to remove heavy metals, hyperbaric oxygen treatments to promote healing in the damaged tissue, a cocktail of antioxidants and anti-inflammatories at doses that would normally be considered dangerous, and most controversially, stem cell therapy to try to regenerate some of the damaged lung tissue. The stem cell component isn't FDA approved for this application, Dr. Reeves admitted. But we've seen promising results in laboratory studies and a handful of compassionate use cases. The theory is that if we can calm the ongoing inflammatory response and remove the residual toxins, then introduce stem cells to the damaged areas, we might be able to reverse some of the scarring. What are the risks? Considerable. The treatment could accelerate the fibrosis if your immune system reacts badly. It could cause tumor growth if the stem cells proliferate uncontrollably. Your kidneys, already damaged, might not be able to handle the additional strain. There's a chance, maybe 15 to 20%, that the treatment could kill you. And if I do nothing, based on your current trajectory, you have maybe 18 months before you'll need continuous oxygen support. And within 3 years, well, the pulmonary fibrosis will likely be fatal without a transplant you're unlikely to receive. It wasn't much of a choice. Phineas looked at Delilah, saw the fear in her eyes but also the desperate hope. They'd been married 22 years, had raised 2 kids who were now in college, had plans for retirement that involved an RV and the open road. All of that was gone now. But maybe, just maybe, this treatment could give them something back. When do we start? The treatment began 2 weeks later, after Cordelia had somehow navigated the insurance appeals and gotten approval for the experimental protocol under the compassionate use exemption. The first phase was the worst. The chelation therapy made him violently ill, and the high-dose medications caused hallucinations and seizures. For 3 days, Phineas existed in a nightmare world where the walls of his hospital room melted and reformed, where he could hear voices of people who weren't there, where his dead father sat in the corner chair and told him he was disappointed. Delilah never left his side, holding his hand through the worst of it, talking to him when he was lucid, singing the songs they danced to at their wedding when he was lost in delirium. The nursing staff at Dr. Reeves's clinic was exceptional, managing his symptoms with a combination of medications and alternative therapies. Acupuncture for the nausea, meditation recordings for the anxiety, massage therapy for the muscle spasms. The hyperbaric treatments came next. Being sealed in the chamber triggered severe claustrophobia that Phineas had never experienced before. The first session, he lasted only 10 minutes before pounding on the walls, gasping for air despite the pure oxygen being pumped in. It took a week of gradual exposure and anti-anxiety medications before he could complete a full 2-hour session. But something was happening. Slowly, incrementally, Phineas began to feel different. Not better exactly, but different. The constant burning in his chest lessened from agony to merely severe discomfort. He could take deeper breaths without feeling like his lungs were tearing. The tremors in his hands, while still present, became manageable enough that he could feed himself without assistance. "Your latest scans show improvement," Dr. Reeves said after 6 weeks of treatment. "Not dramatic, but measurable. The fibrosis has stopped progressing, and there's evidence of some tissue regeneration. It's early, but it's promising." The stem cell therapy was scheduled for week 8, but the night before the procedure, everything went wrong. Phineas woke at 3 a.m. with crushing chest pain different from his usual discomfort. This was sharp, radiating down his left arm, making him break out in a cold sweat. Delilah called 911, and within minutes, he was in an ambulance racing through Houston traffic. Heart attack. The months of systemic inflammation, the stress on his body from both the chemical exposure and the aggressive treatment, the pre-existing damage to his cardiovascular system. It had all culminated in what the emergency room doctor called a significant cardiac event. "We need to do an emergency catheterization," the cardiologist explained. "There's a 90% blockage in your left anterior descending artery. Without immediate intervention, the damage could be fatal." As they wheeled him into the operating room, Phineas grabbed Delilah's hand. If something happens, nothing's going to happen. You're too stubborn to die on me now. But as the anesthesia took hold, Phineas wasn't so sure. He'd been fighting for months, enduring pain that would have broken most people, subjecting himself to treatments that were as likely to kill him as cure him. And for what? Even if he survived, he'd never drive again, never be the man he was. Maybe it would be better to just let go. The procedure was successful, but the recovery was another setback. The heart attack had weakened him further, and Dr. Reeves had to postpone the stem cell therapy indefinitely. The experimental treatment was put on hold while his cardiac team tried to stabilize his heart function. More medications were added to his already overwhelming regimen. More specialists joined his ever-growing medical team. It was during this recovery period that Morrison, the tanker driver Phineas had saved, came to visit. He walked with a cane, his legs still healing from the crash. But he was walking. He was breathing on his own. He was alive. "I owe you my life," Morrison said, sitting carefully in the visitor's chair. "If you hadn't pulled me away from that truck, I'd have died from the fumes. You'd have done the same." "No, I don't think I would have. I knew what was in that tanker. I knew how dangerous it was. I should have warned you to stay back, but I was too scared, too hurt. You came anyway." Morrison explained that he was cooperating fully with the investigation into Pelican chemical transport. He'd provided documents showing that the company routinely mixed incompatible chemicals to save on transportation costs, that they threatened drivers who refused unsafe loads, that they had bribed inspectors to overlook violations. "They're going down," Morrison said. "FBI's involved now. Criminal charges. The owner, Thibodeau. He's looking at 20 years. Won't help you get better, but maybe it means something." It did mean something, but Phineas was too tired to fully process it. Each day had become a battle just to maintain the status quo, to not get worse. The experimental treatment had bought him time, maybe, but at what cost? His medical bills had now exceeded $500,000. Even with insurance, even with the assistance programs Cordelia had found, they were drowning in debt. Delilah had sold their house, taking a massive loss in the rushed sale. They'd moved in with her sister in Pensacola after all, the very thing Phineas had sworn wouldn't happen. Their children had taken out additional student loans to cover expenses their parents could no longer help with. The retirement accounts had been emptied, the life insurance policies cashed in. Everything they'd built over 22 years of marriage was gone, consumed by medical bills and living expenses. The legal settlement, when it finally came, was insulting. Pelican Chemical Transport had declared bankruptcy to avoid the mounting lawsuits. The insurance coverage was split among dozens of victims. Phineas's share, after legal fees, was $180,000, enough to cover about 3 months of his ongoing medical expenses. "We can appeal," Patricia Sterling said, but her tone suggested she knew it was hopeless. "Or we can go after the chemical manufacturers, argue they should have had better safeguards against mixing. How long would that take? Years, maybe a decade." Phineas didn't have years. The latest pulmonary function tests showed he was at 40% capacity and declining. The neurological symptoms were worsening. He'd had 2 seizures in the past month. His kidneys were failing, slowly but steadily. Dr. Reeves wanted to try the stem cell therapy, insisted it was his best chance, but insurance had denied coverage, and the out-of-pocket cost was $200,000. It was Cordelia who found a solution, though it came from an unexpected source. A documentary filmmaker named James Brennan had been following several chemical exposure cases for a film about industrial accidents in America. He'd heard about Phineas's story and wanted to feature it. More importantly, he had connections to a medical charity that might fund the stem cell treatment in exchange for allowing them to document the procedure. "You'd be on camera," Cordelia explained. "They'd film your treatment, your recovery, or, well, whatever happens. It's invasive, but it's also your only shot at getting the treatment." Phineas thought about his dignity, about becoming a spectacle, a cautionary tale for others to gawk at. Then he thought about Delilah, about their children, about the possibility, however slim, of having some kind of future. Set it up. The film crew arrived a week later. They were respectful, professional, but their presence was a constant reminder that Phineas's suffering had become content, his struggle entertainment for an audience he'd never meet. They filmed him taking his medications, struggling through physical therapy, breaking down in tears when the pain became unbearable. They interviewed Delilah about watching her husband disappear piece by piece, filmed her crying in the hospital chapel when she thought no one was watching. But they also captured moments of grace. Morrison visiting regularly, bringing other truckers who'd heard about Phineas's sacrifice. The cards and letters from drivers across the country, many containing small checks or gift cards, trying to help one of their own. The nurse who sang to him during the worst of his treatments, her voice carrying through the pain like a lifeline. Dr. Reeves began the stem cell therapy on a Tuesday morning in November, 8 months after the chemical exposure. The procedure itself was anticlimactic, an IV drip of clear fluid that looked no different from the dozens of other IVs Phineas had received. But the cells in that fluid represented the most advanced medical science available. Microscopic healers programmed to seek out damaged tissue and begin regeneration. "The first 48 hours are critical," Dr. Reeves explained to the camera. "His immune system will either accept the cells and allow them to work, or it will attack them as invaders. If it's the latter, we could see a massive inflammatory response that his weakened body might not survive." For 2 days, Phineas existed in a strange twilight. Not quite conscious, but not fully unconscious either. He was aware of people around him, of machines beeping, of Delilah's hand in his, but it all felt distant, like he was watching from somewhere outside his body. He dreamed of driving, of the open road stretching endlessly ahead, of the freedom he'd never have again. The 48 hours passed like 48 years. Phineas's body temperature spiked to 104 degrees, then plummeted to 95. His blood pressure swung wildly from dangerously high to barely detectable. The medical team worked around the clock, adjusting medications, monitoring vital signs, trying to keep his body stable while the stem cells did their work, or destroyed him trying. On the morning of the 3rd day, something shifted. The fever broke suddenly, leaving Phineas drenched in sweat but lucid for the first time since the treatment began. When he opened his eyes, truly opened them without the fog of delirium, he saw Delilah asleep in the chair beside his bed, her hand still clutching his. The documentary crew was there too, camera rolling, capturing what they probably thought might be his last moments. But Phineas didn't feel like he was dying. For the first time in 8 months, he took a breath that didn't feel like inhaling broken glass. It still hurt, everything still hurt, but it was different. The crushing weight on his chest had lifted slightly. The burning in his lungs had diminished from an inferno to merely a harsh flame. "Delilah," he whispered, his voice rough but clearer than it had been in months. She jerked awake, tears immediately filling her eyes when she saw him conscious and alert. "Ben, how do you feel?" "Like I got hit by a smaller truck this time." Dr. Reeves arrived within minutes, having been alerted by the nursing staff. He performed a quick examination, his face carefully neutral, but Phineas caught the slight widening of his eyes when he listened to his lungs. "The inflammation markers in your blood have dropped by 40% overnight," Dr. Reeves said, pulling up test results on his tablet. Your oxygen saturation is at 92% on room air. That's up from 85% before the treatment. These are significant improvements, Mr. Blackwood. Is it working? The stem cells? It's too early to say definitively, but the initial signs are promising. We'll need to do imaging studies, pulmonary function tests, a full workup. But the fact that your body didn't reject the cells, that we're seeing improvement rather than deterioration, yes, I'd say it's working. The documentary crew captured it all. The cautious hope in Dr. Reeves's voice, Delilah's tears of relief, Phineas's shaky smile. What they didn't capture, what couldn't be conveyed through a camera lens, was the feeling inside Phineas's chest. Not just the physical sensation of easier breathing, but something else. For months, he'd felt his body dying around him, each system failing in turn. Now, for the first time, he felt like his body was fighting back. The improvement was slow and far from complete. The stem cells, Dr. Reeves explained, would take months to fully integrate and regenerate tissue. There would be setbacks, plateaus, possibly additional treatments needed. But the trajectory had changed. Instead of managing decline, they were now promoting recovery. 2 weeks after the stem cell therapy, Phineas managed to walk the entire length of the hospital corridor without oxygen support. It took him 15 minutes with multiple rest stops and left him exhausted for hours afterward. But he did it. The physical therapist, a young woman named Maria Santos, actually applauded when he reached the end of the hallway. 6 weeks ago, you couldn't walk 10 feet, she said. This is remarkable progress. The documentary crew interviewed him that day, asking how it felt to be improving. Phineas struggled to find the words. How could he explain that every small victory, walking down a hallway, eating solid food without choking, sleeping for more than 2 hours without waking in pain, felt like conquering Mount Everest? How could he convey the mental toll of fighting for every breath for 8 months, only to suddenly find breathing just a little bit easier? It's like drowning for so long you forget what air tastes like, he finally said. Then someone pulls you up just enough that your nose breaks the surface. You're still in the water, still struggling, but that tiny bit of air changes everything. Morrison visited again, this time bringing someone unexpected, Thibodeau's daughter, Evangeline. She was young, maybe 25, with the hollow look of someone carrying unbearable guilt. Phineas recognized the name immediately, remembered Cordelia mentioning that the owner of Pelican Chemical Transport had a daughter who'd been trying to distance herself from the family business even before the accident. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I know I have no right to be here, but I needed to apologize. What my father's company did, the corners they cut, the lives they destroyed, I knew something was wrong. I should have done something sooner." "You're not responsible for your father's choices," Phineas said, though part of him wanted to rage at her, to make someone pay for what had been done to him. Maybe not legally, but morally? I worked in the office for 2 years. I saw the safety violations, heard the drivers complaining. I told myself it wasn't my problem, that I was just there temporarily until I figured out what to do with my life. But my silence made me complicit. She pulled out an envelope, thick with papers. "I've been cooperating with the FBI investigation. These are copies of internal communications, emails between my father and his partners discussing how to hide the mixed chemical loads from inspectors. There's enough here to ensure criminal convictions, not just civil penalties." Morrison looked uncomfortable. "Evangeline, you sure about this? That's your father you're sending to prison." "My father sent dozens of people to the hospital and destroyed lives for profit. He knew the risks and didn't care. If I don't do this, if I let family loyalty override basic human decency, then I'm no better than him." She turned back to Phineas. "I've also liquidated my trust fund. It's not much compared to what you've lost, but it's everything I have access to. $300,000. I know it doesn't fix anything, but maybe it helps with the medical bills." Phineas stared at the check she placed on his bedside table. It was more money than the insurance settlement, more than he'd make in 5 years of driving. It wouldn't bring back his health, wouldn't restore his career, but it would keep them afloat. Would ensure Delilah didn't have to sell everything they had left. "I can't take this," he said, even as part of him screamed that he absolutely could, that he deserved it and more. "You can, and you will," Evangeline said firmly. "It's not charity. It's not even really compensation. It's just the only thing I can do that might help in some small way. Please, Mr. Blackwood, let me do this one right thing." The documentary crew had filmed the entire exchange, though Evangeline had asked them not to use her face or full name in the final cut. She left shortly after, but not before pressing a business card into Cordelia's hand with a note that she wanted to help fund the patient advocacy organization. That night, as Phineas lay in his hospital bed processing the day's events, he experienced something he hadn't felt in months, a seizure different from the others. This one came with an aura first, a strange smell like burning plastic that wasn't really there. Then his vision fractured, the room splitting into prismatic fragments. His body convulsed, but he remained conscious throughout, aware of every muscle spasm, every neuron misfiring. When it ended, Dr. Winters, the neurologist, was there with a grim expression. "The EEG shows unusual activity in your temporal lobe. This could be a new manifestation of the chemical damage, or it could be something else. We need to do more testing." The MRI revealed what Dr. Winters had feared. A small mass in his temporal lobe, possibly a tumor, possibly just inflamed tissue, but definitely abnormal. It could be a side effect of the stem cell therapy, cells growing where they shouldn't. Or it could be related to the original chemical exposure. Either way, it needed to be biopsied. "Brain surgery," Phineas said flatly, when the neurosurgeon to Robert Thornton explained the procedure. "On top of everything else, now I need brain surgery." "It's a relatively minor procedure," Dr. Thornton assured him, though nothing involving opening someone's skull seemed minor to Phineas. "We'll go in through a small incision, take a sample of the mass, and determine what we're dealing with. If it's benign inflammation, we can treat it with medication. If it's something more serious, we'll discuss options." The documentary crew wanted to film the surgery, but Phineas drew the line there. Some things were too private, too terrifying to share with an audience. The night before the procedure, he wrote letters to Delilah and their children, just in case. He'd faced death multiple times over the past 8 months, but somehow, the idea of someone cutting into his brain felt more final. The surgery went well, technically. They got the tissue sample they needed, and Phineas woke up with his cognitive functions intact. But the waiting for results was agony. 3 days of not knowing if he had brain cancer on top of everything else. 3 days of Delilah trying to stay positive while her eyes betrayed her fear. When Dr. Thornton finally came with the results, his expression was puzzled rather than grim. "It's not cancer," he said immediately, knowing that was their first concern. "But it's also not simple inflammation. The mass appears to be a collection of cells that have been altered at the molecular level, possibly by the chemical exposure. They're not malignant, but they're also not normal brain tissue." "What does that mean?" "Honestly, we don't know. This is unprecedented. The cells aren't dying, but they're also not proliferating. They're just there. We'll need to monitor it, do regular scans, watch for any changes. It's possible they'll be reabsorbed by your body over time, or they might remain stable indefinitely. Another unknown, another thing to monitor. another potential crisis waiting in the wings. Phineas was beginning to feel like a medical experiment rather than a patient. His body a collection of mysteries and anomalies that doctors studied with fascination and concern in equal measure. But despite everything, he was improving. 6 weeks after the stem cell therapy, his lung function had increased to 55%. He could walk for 30 minutes without oxygen support. The tremors in his hands had decreased enough that he could write again, though his handwriting looked like that of an elderly man rather than someone in his 40s. It was during one of his physical therapy sessions that Phineas met another patient who would change his perspective on everything. Thomas Rayburn was a former Marine who'd been exposed to burned pit smoke in Iraq, developing similar respiratory and neurological symptoms to Phineas. He'd been fighting for proper treatment for 5 years, battling the VA system, advocating for himself and other veterans with toxic exposure. The thing about chemical exposure, Thomas said during one of their conversations, is that it's an invisible wound. People see a missing limb, they understand. They see someone in a wheelchair, they get it. But damage to your lungs, your brain, your organs, that's hidden. People think you're faking, exaggerating, looking for a payout. You don't look sick, Phineas agreed. That's what they keep saying. Exactly. So we have to be our own advocates, our own experts. I've learned more about pulmonary medicine in the last 5 years than most medical students. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. The doctors, they do their best, but they see us for 15 minutes every few weeks. We live in these bodies 24/7. Thomas introduced Phineas to a support group for toxic exposure survivors that met virtually twice a week. There were people from all over the country, workers from chemical plants, residents near Superfund sites, first responders from various disasters. Each had their own story of exposure, illness, and fighting for treatment and recognition. One member, a woman named Grace Patterson from Texas, had been exposed to benzene at a refinery 20 years ago and was still dealing with the consequences. The initial exposure is just the beginning, she said during one meeting. It's the gift that keeps on giving. New symptoms pop up years later. Organs you didn't even know were affected start failing. And the worst part is the uncertainty, never knowing what's coming next. Another member, Jerome Williams from Louisiana, had been exposed to similar chemicals as Phineas during a plant explosion. He'd been told he had 6 months to live 3 years ago. Doctors don't know everything, he said. They make educated guesses based on statistics, but we're not statistics. We're individuals, and some of us are too stubborn to die on schedule. The support group became a lifeline for Phineas, a place where he didn't have to explain his symptoms, where everyone understood the frustration of being poisoned through no fault of your own, where dark humor about medication side effects and medical bills was not only accepted, but encouraged. It was through the support group that Phineas learned about a class action lawsuit being organized against the chemical manufacturers whose products had been in the Pelican tanker. Unlike the suit against Pelican, which had been limited by the company's bankruptcy, this one targeted deep-pocketed corporations with extensive insurance policies. It'll take years, Patricia Sterling warned when Phineas asked about joining. These companies have teams of lawyers, unlimited resources. They'll delay, appeal, try to wait us out. Some of the plaintiffs won't live to see a settlement. But Phineas signed on anyway. If not for himself, then for others who might be exposed in the future. The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed damning information. Internal memos showing the companies knew their chemicals could react dangerously if mixed, that they'd lobbied against regulations requiring separate transportation, that they'd calculated it was cheaper to pay occasional settlements than to implement proper safety measures. The documentary crew filmed Phineas's deposition, 7 hours of detailed testimony about his exposure and its consequences. He broke down twice during the questioning, once when describing the pain of his initial hospitalization, and again when talking about telling his children he might not survive to see them graduate from college. The chemical companies will argue that Pelican was solely responsible, the lead attorney explained afterward. But we're arguing that they created an inherently dangerous product without adequate warnings or safeguards. It's like manufacturing a bomb and then claiming you're not responsible when someone else lights the fuse. 3 months after the stem cell therapy, Phineas had improved enough to leave the hospital and move to an outpatient rehabilitation facility. It was a small victory. He still needed daily medical support, still couldn't breathe without difficulty, still had seizures and tremors and a host of other symptoms. But he could walk 200 yards without stopping, could shower independently, could eat solid food without choking. The rehabilitation facility was in Houston, close enough to Dr. Reeves' clinic for regular monitoring, but far from the home in Mobile he'd probably never see again. Delilah had rented a small apartment nearby, their life now reduced to what could fit in 2 suitcases and a few boxes. The $300,000 from Evangeline Thibodeau had paid off the most pressing medical debts and secured their housing for the next year, but the future remained uncertain. It was there, in the sterile environment of the rehab facility, that Phineas received news that Morrison had died. Not from his injuries from the crash, but from a heart attack brought on by the stress and ongoing health issues from the chemical exposure. He'd seemed to be recovering, had even talked about returning to driving, but his heart had simply given out one morning while he was having breakfast with his wife. The news hit Phineas harder than he expected. Morrison had become a friend through their shared trauma, someone who understood what it meant to survive that night on the interstate. Now he was gone. Another casualty of Pelican's greed and negligence. Another life cut short by decisions made in boardrooms far from the dangerous roads where drivers risked everything. Phineas attended the funeral via video link, still too weak to travel. Morrison's widow thanked him for trying to save her husband, for giving them 8 more months together than they would have had otherwise. But Phineas couldn't shake the feeling that he'd simply delayed the inevitable, that the chemicals had killed Morrison just as surely as if he'd died that night, just more slowly and cruelly. The documentary crew interviewed him about Morrison's death, and for the first time, Phineas let his anger show. Not the defeated frustration he'd expressed before, but real, burning rage at the system that allowed this to happen, at the companies that prioritized profit over safety, at a society that treated truckers as expendable until they needed their services. Morrison's dead because someone decided saving a few $1,000s on transportation costs was worth risking lives, he said to the camera. I'm dying slowly because of the same calculation. How many more of us have to suffer before something changes? The rehabilitation facility in Houston became Phineas's entire world for the next 4 months. Each day followed the same grueling routine. Wake at 5 a.m. for blood draws and vital signs, breakfast of pills disguised as food that his damaged taste buds could barely detect, physical therapy that left him exhausted by 9 a.m., occupational therapy to relearn basic tasks his trembling hands struggled with, lunch of more medications, respiratory therapy that felt like drowning in reverse, cognitive therapy for the increasing memory issues, dinner if he could keep it down, and finally sleep plagued by nightmares of chemical clouds and burning lungs. The other patients at the facility were a mix of stroke survivors, accident victims, and a few other chemical exposure cases. Phineas gravitated toward the latter, finding kinship in their shared experience of invisible damage. There was Marcus Fitzgerald, exposed to pesticides during his 20 years as a crop duster, now unable to walk without assistance due to severe neuropathy. There was Linda Carrington, a former refinery worker whose liver was failing from benzene exposure, waiting for a transplant that might never come. And there was young Timothy Morse, only 28, exposed to industrial solvents at a poorly ventilated factory, his promising career as an engineer cut short by cognitive damage that left him struggling to remember his own address. "We're the forgotten casualties," Marcus said one evening as they sat in the facility's common room, watching the news cover another industrial accident, this one in Ohio. "Nobody marches for us, no ribbons or awareness months. Just medical bills and declining health while the companies responsible count their profits." It was during this time that Dr. Ambrose Hartley made an unexpected visit. He'd been following Phineas's case from Louisiana, consulting with Dr. Reeves on the stem cell therapy outcomes. But this visit wasn't about treatment. It was about an opportunity. "There's going to be a congressional hearing," Dr. Hartley explained, sitting across from Phineas in the facility's consultation room. "The House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure is investigating chemical transport safety following a series of accidents, including yours. They want testimony from survivors, and your case has caught their attention." "Why mine specifically?" "Because you're articulate. Your documentation is extensive, thanks to the documentary crew, and frankly, because you saved Morrison's life. It makes you sympathetic. Heroic, even. Politicians like heroes, especially ones who've been wronged by corporate negligence." Phineas thought about it. Traveling to Washington, D.C. in his condition would be grueling, potentially dangerous. But if his testimony could prevent even one other driver from experiencing what he'd endured, wasn't it worth the risk? "When?" 6 weeks. That gives us time to prepare your testimony, coordinate with the other witnesses, and hopefully see continued improvement in your condition." The preparation was intensive. Lawyers from the class action suit helped draft his statement, ensuring every word was legally precise while maintaining emotional impact. The documentary crew wanted to film his testimony, seeing it as a potential climax for their film. Cordelia worked tirelessly to arrange medical support for the trip, including a respiratory therapist who would travel with them and emergency plans for every conceivable crisis. During this preparation period, Phineas received another unexpected visitor. It was his son, Michael, who'd dropped out of college to take a job driving trucks, following in his father's footsteps despite everything that had happened. "Dad, you've got to talk him out of it," Delilah had pleaded when she heard. But when Phineas saw his son, wearing the same type of work boots he'd worn for 19 years, carrying himself with the same quiet confidence Phineas had once possessed, he couldn't bring himself to discourage the boy. "It's honest work," Michael said, sitting beside his father's bed. "And someone's got to do it. The world doesn't run without truckers. You taught me that. I also taught you it was safe if you were careful. I was wrong about that." "No, you weren't. You were careful. You followed every protocol, maintained safe distances, knew your cargo. What happened to you was criminal negligence by others, not a failure on your part. I'm not going to let fear of what might happen keep me from living my life." It was like looking at himself 20 years ago, before the weight of miles and the reality of danger had worn him down. Phineas wanted to protect his son, to forbid him from taking the same risks, but he also understood the pull of the road, the pride in keeping America moving, the brotherhood of drivers who looked out for each other. "Promise me something," Phineas said finally. "Never stop in isolated areas. Always check what you're hauling, really check, not just the paperwork. And if something doesn't feel right, don't ignore that feeling. Your life is worth more than any load." "I promise, Dad. And I promise something else. I'm going to tell your story to every driver I meet. What happened to you, what you sacrificed. It won't be forgotten." 2 weeks before the congressional hearing, Phineas experienced another setback. The mass in his temporal lobe, which had been stable for months, suddenly began to grow. Not malignantly, Dr. Thornton assured him after emergency scans, but growing nonetheless. It was pressing on surrounding tissue, causing increased seizures and new symptoms, phantom smells, auditory hallucinations, moments of complete disorientation where he didn't recognize Delilah or know where he was. "We can try radiation to shrink it," Dr. Thornton suggested. "Low dose, targeted, minimal side effects, but Mr. Blackwood, I need to be honest, we're in uncharted territory. This type of chemical-induced brain alteration hasn't been documented before. We're essentially making educated guesses." The radiation treatments began immediately, adding another layer of misery to Phineas's daily routine. The nausea was overwhelming, and the fatigue was unlike anything he'd experienced before. A bone-deep exhaustion that made lifting a spoon feel like climbing a mountain. But slowly, over 10 days of treatment, the mass began to shrink, and the worst of the neurological symptoms receded. Dr. Reeves performed another evaluation a week before the hearing. The stem cells had continued their work, and Phineas's lung function had improved to 62%. Not normal, never normal again, but enough that he could speak for extended periods without oxygen support, could walk the length of the Capitol building if needed. "You're a medical miracle," Dr. Reeves said, reviewing the test results. "By all rights, given your initial exposure levels, you should be dead. The fact that you're not only alive but improving, it's going to make heads turn at medical conferences for years. I don't feel like a miracle. I feel like a broken machine held together with duct tape and prayer. Sometimes that's what miracles look like." The trip to Washington, D.C. was orchestrated with military precision. Cordelia had arranged for a medical transport flight, avoiding the stress of commercial aviation. A nurse and respiratory therapist accompanied them, along with enough medical equipment to stock a small emergency room. The documentary crew filmed it all, recognizing the significance of a man who could barely walk 6 months ago, traveling across the country to testify before Congress. They arrived 2 days early to allow Phineas to rest and acclimate. The hotel room had been modified with medical equipment, oxygen tanks stationed discreetly behind furniture, emergency medications organized on the nightstand. Delilah hadn't left his side once during the journey, her presence the only constant in a life that had become unrecognizable. The night before the hearing, Phineas couldn't sleep. He kept reviewing his testimony, 5 pages of carefully crafted words that somehow had to convey 8 months of suffering, a lifetime destroyed, a system that valued profit over human life. How could words capture the sensation of chemicals burning through lung tissue? How could politicians who'd never driven a truck understand the split-second decision to save another driver's life? At 3 a.m., his phone rang. It was Thomas Rayburn from the support group, calling from California where it was only midnight. "Couldn't sleep," Thomas said. "Figured you couldn't either. Big day tomorrow. I keep thinking I'm going to forget everything. Have a seizure, make things worse instead of better." "You won't. You know why? Because you're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for Morrison, for all of us who've been poisoned and forgotten. That'll carry you through." They talked for an hour, Thomas sharing his own experience testifying before the VA, the frustration of trying to make bureaucrats understand suffering they'd never experienced, but also the satisfaction of seeing policies change, of knowing his words had made a difference, however small. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and humid, Washington's September weather matching Phineas's mood. Getting dressed was an ordeal. His hands shook too badly to button his shirt, requiring Delilah's help. The suit they'd bought him hung loose on his diminished frame, making him look like a child playing dress-up. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw determination in his own eyes that hadn't been there in months. The Capitol building was intimidating in its grandeur, all marble and history and power. Phineas had to stop 3 times climbing the steps, his portable oxygen tank a reminder of his limitations. The documentary crew filmed from a respectful distance, understanding this wasn't performance but survival. The hearing room was packed, representatives from chemical companies, their lawyers in expensive suits taking notes on leather portfolios. Families of other victims, some in wheelchairs, some with oxygen tanks like Phineas. Environmental activists with signs they'd been told to keep hidden. And in the back, surprisingly, Evangeline Thibodeau, no longer trying to hide from her father's legacy. The committee members filed in, 11 representatives from various states, most looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. The chairman, Representative James Holbrook from Texas, called the hearing to order with the disinterest of someone who'd sat through too many similar proceedings. The first witnesses were industry representatives, armed with statistics about safety improvements, accident rate decreases, economic importance of chemical transport. They spoke in measured tones about unfortunate incidents and statistical anomalies, never once using words like victims or negligence. Then it was Phineas's turn. The walk to the witness table felt like miles, each step observed by dozens of eyes. When he sat down, adjusting the microphone with trembling hands, he looked up at the committee members, then back at Delilah in the gallery, drawing strength from her encouraging nod. "My name is Phineas Blackwood," he began, his voice rougher than he'd hoped but still clear. 13 months ago, I was a healthy 43-year-old man with 19 years of safe driving experience. I had a wife, 2 kids in college, a mortgage, and plans for retirement. Today, I can't walk 100 yards without oxygen support. My lungs are scarred beyond repair. I have seizures from chemical-induced brain damage. My liver and kidneys are failing. I've lost everything. My career, my savings, my health, my future. Because someone decided it was cheaper to transport incompatible chemicals together than to run 2 separate trucks. He paused, taking a careful breath, aware of every eye in the room on him. But I'm not here to talk about what I've lost. I'm here to talk about what we as a society are losing every day we allow this to continue. Morrison. Edwards is dead. He was the driver of the chemical tanker I tried to save that night. He survived the initial exposure only to die 8 months later from complications, leaving a widow and 3 children. Marcus Fitzgerald can't walk because of pesticide exposure. Linda Carrington needs a liver transplant she'll probably never get. Timothy Morse, 28 years old, has the cognitive function of someone 3 times his age. Representative Holbrook interrupted. "Mr. Blackwood, we're sympathetic to your situation, but surely these are isolated incidents. The chemical industry employs millions, contributes billions to the economy." "With respect, Representative," Phineas cut him off, surprising himself with his boldness. "How many billions is a human life worth? How many jobs justify poisoning workers and innocent bystanders? I'm not asking you to shut down the chemical industry. I'm asking you to make them follow the safety rules that already exist, to enforce the penalties that are already on the books, to stop treating human beings as acceptable losses in the name of profit." Another representative, a woman from Ohio named Patricia Summers, leaned forward. "Mr. Blackwood, the company responsible for your exposure has been prosecuted. The owner is facing prison time. Isn't the system working? Pelican Chemical Transport was one small company among hundreds. They were prosecuted only because they were caught in such a spectacular fashion. Because I survived to testify. Because the documentary crew here filmed everything. Because public pressure demanded action. How many other companies are operating the same way right now, mixing chemicals that shouldn't be mixed, threatening drivers who refuse unsafe loads, bribing inspectors to look the other way. The system isn't working, Representative Summers. It's failing every single day, and people are dying because of it. For the next hour, Phineas answered questions, each one more challenging than the last. The industry lawyers tried to poke holes in his testimony, suggesting he'd acted recklessly, that his medical problems might have pre-existed the exposure. But Phineas had come prepared with documentation, medical records, expert testimony from Dr. Hartley and Dr. Reeves, who'd submitted written statements. When Representative Martin Crawford from Louisiana, known for his close ties to the chemical industry, suggested that additional regulations would hurt business, Phineas felt his control finally snap. Representative Crawford, I drove through your district every week for 19 years. I know the chemical plants along Cancer Alley. I've seen the communities where childhood asthma rates are 5 times the national average, where cancer is so common they don't even question it anymore. Those are your constituents dying, sir. At what point does their suffering matter more than campaign contributions? The room went silent. Crawford's face turned red, and he started to respond angrily, but Holbrook gavelled him down. The witness will maintain decorum, but the representative will allow him to finish his testimony. Phineas pulled out a photo, his hands shaking as he held it up. It was from 2 years ago, him and Delilah at their daughter's high school graduation, both of them healthy and smiling, the future bright with possibility. This was me before, he said, his voice breaking slightly. I wasn't asking for anything extraordinary, just the ability to do my job safely, to come home to my family, to live without fear that the cargo I was hauling might kill me. That's all any of us want. We're not heroes, we're not martyrs, we're just people trying to make a living, and we deserve better than being treated as expendable. When his testimony concluded, the room erupted in applause from the gallery, quickly gavelled down by Holbrook. As Phineas made his way back to his seat, his legs barely carrying him, he passed the industry lawyers. One of them, a young man who'd been particularly aggressive in his questioning, wouldn't meet his eyes. The hearing continued for another 2 hours, with testimony from other survivors, medical experts, and industry representatives trying to minimize the damage Phineas's words had done. But the momentum had shifted. Representatives who'd seemed disinterested were now asking pointed questions about enforcement, about inspection protocols, about the revolving door between regulatory agencies and the industries they were supposed to oversee. That evening, back in the hotel room, Phineas collapsed into bed, completely spent. The effort of testifying had taken everything he had. Delilah lay beside him, careful not to disturb the oxygen cannula or monitoring wires. "You did it," she whispered. "You told them the truth. Will it matter?" "It already has. Did you see their faces?" "Some of them were really listening, Finn, really hearing you." The next morning, the documentary crew conducted their final interview. James Brennan, the director, asked Phineas what he hoped would come from his testimony, from the film they were making. "I hope no other family has to go through what we've gone through," Phineas said simply. "I hope drivers feel empowered to refuse unsafe loads without fear of losing their jobs. I hope the companies that put profit over safety are held accountable, really accountable, not just fined amounts that are pocket change to them. And I hope people understand that truckers aren't just steering wheel holders. We're human beings with families, with dreams, with value beyond our ability to move cargo from point A to point B." 2 weeks after returning to Houston, Phineas received news that the congressional hearing had resulted in proposed legislation, the Chemical Transport Safety Act, informally being called Phineas's Law by advocates. It would mandate stricter separation of incompatible chemicals, increase penalties for violations, protect whistleblowers who reported unsafe practices, and establish a victims' compensation fund for those affected by chemical exposure. The legislation would face fierce opposition from industry lobbyists, would be watered down in committees, might never even come to a vote. But it was something. It was recognition that what happened to Phineas mattered, that Morrison's death wasn't in vain, that the suffering of countless others deserved acknowledgement and action. The documentary, The Last Load, premiered 3 months later at the South by Southwest Film Festival. Phineas was too ill to attend. His condition had stabilized but not improved, leaving him dependent on oxygen support and unable to travel far from his medical team. But he watched via live stream as the audience reacted to his story, many in tears by the end. The film went on to win several awards, was picked up by a major streaming service, and sparked a renewed debate about industrial safety and workers' rights. Phineas received messages from truckers across the country, thanking him for his courage, sharing their own close calls, promising to be more vigilant about the cargo they hauled. But fame, such as it was, didn't heal damaged lungs or restore neural pathways destroyed by organophosphates. 6 months after the congressional hearing, Phineas was back in the hospital with pneumonia, his compromised respiratory system unable to fight off what should have been a minor infection. It took 3 weeks of intensive treatment to stabilize him, and when he was discharged, Dr. Reeves was frank about his prognosis. Your lung function has declined to 50% again. The stem cells helped, but they can't overcome ongoing damage. We can try another round, but the risks increase with each treatment. How long do I have? Without a lung transplant, maybe 2 years, possibly 3 if we're aggressive with treatment. With a transplant, you could have decades, but I'm not a good candidate because of the other organ damage. I'm sorry, Phineas. I wish I had better news. 2 years, maybe 3. It wasn't a death sentence exactly, but it wasn't a future either. It was existence, marking time until his body finally gave out completely. That night, Phineas made a decision. If he only had 2 years, he was going to make them count. He began writing, documenting not just his story, but the stories of everyone he'd met through this ordeal. Marcus Fitzgerald's decades of crop dusting ending in paralysis. Linda Carrington's fight for a liver transplant. Timothy Morse's struggle to maintain his identity as his cognitive function declined. Morrison's widow raising 3 children alone. The writing was slow, laborious with his trembling hands, but it gave him purpose. Cordelia helped, transcribing when the tremors made typing impossible, researching details, fact-checking against medical records. What emerged wasn't just a memoir, but an indictment of a system that prioritized profit over people, efficiency over safety, shareholders over workers. The book, Chemical Highway, A Trucker's Last Testament, was published 14 months later. Phineas did a handful of interviews via video link, his appearance shocking those who remembered the relatively healthy man from the documentary. He was gaunt now, his skin gray, oxygen tubes permanent fixtures. But his mind remained sharp, his conviction unwavering. "People ask if I regret stopping to help Morrison that night," he said in what would be his last interview. "I don't. I regret that we live in a world where helping another human being can cost you everything. I regret that companies can knowingly put people in danger and face minimal consequences. I regret that it takes tragedy to create change, and even then, the change is incremental, insufficient. But I don't regret being human in a moment when humanity was needed." The Chemical Transport Safety Act passed 18 months after the hearing, weakened by amendments, but still meaningful. It included mandatory separation of incompatible chemicals, criminal liability for executives who knowingly violated safety protocols, and a modest victims' compensation fund. It wasn't everything advocates had hoped for, but it was something. Phineas watched the signing ceremony from his hospital bed. his lung function now at 35%, his kidney function requiring dialysis 3 times a week. Delilah held his hand as the president signed the bill, mentioning Phineas by name, calling him a hero who'd sacrificed everything to save another driver and then fought to ensure others wouldn't face the same fate. "You did this," Delilah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "This is your legacy." But Phineas wasn't thinking about legacy. He was thinking about Michael, still driving, now trained in hazmat protocols because of his father's experience. He was thinking about the drivers on the road right now, hopefully a little safer because of the new law. He was thinking about Morrison, who should have been there to see this moment. 3 weeks later, Phineas's condition deteriorated rapidly. The chemical damage had finally overwhelmed his body's ability to compensate. Multiple organ systems began failing simultaneously. Dr. Reeves and Dr. Hartley consulted, trying everything, but they'd run out of miracles. On his last conscious day, Phineas asked Delilah to contact everyone who'd been part of his journey. Cordelia came, bringing news that the patient advocacy organization had received major funding and would be renamed the Blackwood Morrison Foundation. Thomas Rayburn called from California, his own health failing but his spirit unbroken. The support group held a special session, everyone sharing memories and gratitude. Evangeline Thibodeau visited, accompanied by a man Phineas didn't recognize. "This is James Morrison," she said quietly. "Morrison's oldest son. We've been working together to transform Pelican's remaining assets into a safety training program for chemical transport drivers." The young man, maybe 25, had his father's eyes. "Mr. Blackwood, my father talked about you until the end, said you gave him 8 extra months with us. That's 8 months of birthdays, holidays, ordinary Tuesday dinnings that we wouldn't have had. Thank you." As consciousness faded for the last time, Phineas thought about the road. Not the nightmare stretch of I-10 where everything went wrong, but all the other miles. Sunrise over the Texas plains, sunset through the Louisiana bayous, the brotherhood of drivers at truck stops, sharing coffee and stories, the satisfaction of delivering a load safely, of being a vital part of the economy's circulatory system. He'd driven millions of miles over 19 years, and it had taken just 5 minutes of chemical exposure to end it all. But in the time since, he'd traveled a different kind of distance, from victim to advocate, from dying man to catalyst for change. It wasn't the journey he'd planned, but he'd driven it with the same determination he'd once brought to navigating highways. Phineas Blackwood died at 3:47 a.m. on a humid Thursday morning, 2 years and 3 months after the chemical exposure. Delilah was holding his hand. Michael was there, home from a run to be with his father. Their daughter, Sarah, had flown in from graduate school. He wasn't alone, wasn't forgotten, wasn't just another casualty of industrial negligence. The funeral was attended by hundreds, truckers from across the country, many who'd never met Phineas but knew his story. Chemical exposure survivors from the support group, congressional representatives who'd voted for Phineas's law, the documentary crew, there to film the end of a story that had become bigger than any of them had imagined. Morrison's widow spoke at the service. "Phineas Blackwood gave my husband 8 extra months of life by pulling him from that chemical cloud. But more than that, he gave meaning to my husband's death by fighting for change. Every driver who goes home safely because of the new safety protocols, every family that doesn't have to endure what we endured, that's Phineas's true legacy." Michael spoke last, wearing his father's old trucking cap. "My dad used to say that driving truck wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility. You were carrying more than cargo. You were carrying people's livelihoods, their necessities, their dreams. He carried that responsibility until the end, even after he couldn't drive anymore. He carried our stories to Congress, to the public, to anyone who would listen. And now we carry his story forward. 6 months after Phineas's death, the first safety training center funded by the Blackwood Morrison Foundation opened in Houston. It provides free hazmat training for drivers, advocates for stronger safety regulations, and maintains a memorial wall with the names of all drivers killed by preventable chemical exposures. Delilah attended the opening, frail but determined. She cut the ribbon with trembling hands and spoke briefly. Phineas always said the road doesn't care about your plans, only your preparations. We can't prevent every accident, every exposure, every tragedy. But we can prepare better, protect better, value human life better. That's all he wanted. That's all any of us want. The documentary about Phineas won an Academy Award. The director dedicated it to all the invisible victims of industrial negligence and to the heroes like Phineas Blackwood who refused to remain invisible. The book became required reading in several transportation safety programs. The law bearing his name has prevented an estimated dozen major chemical transport incidents in its first year alone. But perhaps Phineas's most lasting legacy is in the conversations at truck stops, where drivers share his story as both warning and inspiration. They talk about the night he chose to save Morrison despite the danger. They discuss the safety protocols that didn't exist before his advocacy. They remember that their lives have value beyond their ability to move freight. The road stretches on, endless and unforgiving. Trucks still carry dangerous chemicals through the night. Drivers still face impossible choices between safety and livelihood. But now, thanks to Phineas Blackwood, they face those choices with better protection, stronger advocacy, and the knowledge that their lives matter. The last entry in Phineas's journal, written 2 days before his death in handwriting barely legible from tremors, reads, "I was a trucker for 19 years. I've been dying for 2 years. But in those 2 years, I've lived more purposefully than in the previous 19. The road took everything from me, my health, my career, my future. But it also gave me the chance to matter, to create change, to ensure others don't suffer as I have. I wouldn't choose this path, but having been forced onto it, I've driven it as best I could. Tell the drivers to stay safe. Tell them they're not alone. Tell them to keep on trucking, but never at the cost of their lives. The load isn't worth it. It never was." The impact of Phineas's story rippled outward in ways no one could have predicted. 3 years after his death, a young chemical engineer named Daniel Rothschild was sitting in a corporate boardroom in Delaware, listening to executives discuss cost-cutting measures for their transportation division. The proposal on the table would consolidate shipments, mixing chemicals that technically could be transported together but increased risk exponentially when combined. "The regulations allow it," the CFO was saying. "We'd save $8 million annually in transportation costs." Daniel, who'd watched the Last Load documentary the night before with his wife, stood up. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. "Gentlemen, I need you to look up Phineas Blackwood. Then tell me if $8 million is worth potentially creating another victim like him." The room went silent. The CEO pulled up the information on his tablet, his face growing pale as he read. The proposal was shelved indefinitely. Daniel was later promoted for his ethical stance, and the company implemented stricter safety protocols that exceeded federal requirements. They called it the Blackwood Standard internally, though it was never officially named. Meanwhile, in a small town in Arkansas, a young woman named Rachel Summers was facing an impossible choice. Her employer, a regional chemical distribution company, was pressuring her to falsify shipping manifests to hide incompatible chemical combinations. She needed the job desperately. Single mother, 2 kids, no college degree. But she'd read Phineas's book, had cried over the chapters describing his deterioration. Rachel made copies of everything. Every falsified document, every threatening email from management, every shipment that violated safety protocols. She sent it all to the Blackwood Morrison Foundation, who connected her with whistleblower attorneys. The resulting investigation shut down the company, prevented what investigators said could have been another Phineas Blackwood situation, and resulted in Rachel receiving a substantial whistleblower award that secured her family's future. She sent a letter to Delilah afterward. "I never met your husband, but his story gave me the courage to do what was right. My children will grow up in a safer world because of his sacrifice." Dr. Marcus Reeves, inspired by his work with Phineas, had revolutionized treatment for chemical exposure victims. The Blackwood Protocol, as it became known in medical circles, combined aggressive early intervention with stem cell therapy and a comprehensive support system. The survival rate for severe chemical exposure had increased by 30% in the 5 years since Phineas's death. "Every patient I treat, I think of Phineas," Dr. Reeves said in a medical journal interview. "He taught us that these aren't just medical cases. They're people with families, dreams, stories that deserve to be heard. We don't just treat the physical damage anymore. We treat the whole person." One of his patients was a young trucker named Antonio Vega, exposed to a chemical spill eerily similar to Phineas's incident. But because of the rapid response protocols developed from Phineas's case, Antonio received treatment within hours instead of days. The stem cell therapy was started within a week. 6 months later, while still dealing with significant health issues, Antonio was able to walk his daughter down the aisle at her wedding. "I'm alive because Phineas Blackwood died fighting for people like me," Antonio said at a foundation fundraiser. "I never met him, but I owe him everything." The Blackwood Morrison Foundation had grown beyond anyone's imagination. Cordelia Fitzgerald, now its executive director, had transformed it from a small advocacy group into a national force. They operated 3 training centers, provided emergency financial assistance to over 500 families affected by chemical exposure, and had successfully lobbied for safety regulations in 12 states. But Cordelia never forgot the man who started it all. In her office hung the photo Phineas had shown at the congressional hearing, him and Delilah at their daughter's graduation, healthy and happy. Below it was a plaque with his words, "We're not heroes, we're not martyrs, we're just people trying to make a living." Michael Blackwood had become something of a legend among truckers. He drove with his father's photo taped to his dashboard, a constant reminder of the cost of complacency. He'd also become an unofficial safety advocate, conducting impromptu training sessions at truck stops, sharing his father's story, teaching drivers how to identify dangerous cargo combinations. One night, at a truck stop outside of Birmingham, Michael encountered a young driver named Tommy Prescott, who'd been ordered to haul a mixed chemical load. The company threatened to fire him if he refused. "Let them," Michael said firmly. "No job is worth your life. My father would still be alive if that tanker driver had refused his load. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to document everything. Report it to DOT and call this lawyer." He handed over a card from the foundation's legal team. Tommy refused the load. He was fired. Within 6 months, he'd won a wrongful termination suit. The company was under federal investigation, and Tommy was driving for a reputable company with strict safety standards. He named his first son Phineas. The congressional aide who'd helped draft Phineas's law, a young woman named Jennifer Huang, had gone on to become a congresswoman herself. In her maiden speech on the House floor, she held up Phineas's book. 5 years ago, a dying trucker came to this chamber and asked us to value human life over corporate profit. We passed a law, but laws are only as strong as their enforcement. Today, I'm introducing legislation to increase funding for chemical transport inspections by 300%. We're calling it the Blackwood Amendment, because Phineas Blackwood's death demands more than our sympathy. It demands our action. The amendment passed with bipartisan support, though not without fierce lobbying from the chemical industry. But public opinion had shifted. The documentary had been viewed over 10 million times. The book was in its 5th printing. Phineas Blackwood had become a symbol, a rallying cry, a reminder that workers' lives mattered. In New Orleans, on the stretch of I-10 where Phineas had been exposed, a memorial marker was erected. It was simple, a bronze plaque beside the highway that read, "In memory of Phineas Blackwood and Morrison Edwards, and all those harmed by preventable chemical exposures. Their sacrifice demands our vigilance." Truckers began a tradition of honking their horns when they passed it, a rolling tribute that could be heard for miles. Local residents complained about the noise at first, but when they learned the story behind it, most stopped complaining. Some even stood on the overpass during shift changes waving at the trucks, a community united in remembrance. Delilah lived to see most of these changes, though her health never fully recovered from the stress of Phineas's illness. She spent her remaining years working with the foundation, speaking at events, keeping her husband's memory alive. When she passed peacefully in her sleep 5 years after Phineas, her final words to Michael were, "Tell them your father's story. Never let them forget." The funeral was almost as large as Phineas's had been. Truckers, advocates, survivors, politicians. They all came to honor the woman who'd stood by Phineas through his darkest hours, who'd continued his fight after he was gone. Sarah Blackwood, Phineas's daughter, had become a doctor specializing in occupational medicine. Inspired by her father's struggle, she established free clinics in industrial areas, providing screening and treatment for workers exposed to chemicals. Each clinic had a photo of Phineas in the waiting room with a simple caption, "Your life has value." "My father died believing he'd failed as a provider," Sarah said in a speech at her medical school graduation. "He couldn't work, couldn't support us financially, couldn't be the strong protector he'd always been, but he provided something more valuable than money. He provided change. He supported not just us, but thousands of families by making their work safer. He protected more people with his advocacy than he ever could have with his physical strength." Even the legal system had been transformed by Phineas's case. The precedent, set by the successful prosecution of Pelican Chemical Transport, had emboldened prosecutors nationwide. Chemical companies could no longer hide behind corporate veils and bankruptcy protections. Executives were being held personally liable for safety violations. Insurance companies were demanding stricter safety protocols before providing coverage. A Harvard law professor wrote in a legal journal, "The Blackwood case represents a fundamental shift in how we approach corporate accountability. It's no longer enough to pay fines and move on. Real people face real consequences for putting workers at risk." Phineas Blackwood didn't just change transportation law, he changed corporate law.